Okay, welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Irma and I'm your host for an introduction to creating conscious love with Celina Yana and Ben Goreski. With this, we welcome Celina Yana, author at Rising Woman. Celina is an author and spiritual guide. She's passionate about healing our relationship patterns and making space for authentic love and connection because relationship is the fabric of our being. Celina, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Irma. It's really beautiful to be here. I'm excited to dive in with you all. I'm just reading all of your chat messages here about what brought you here, and it seems like there's a lot of similar themes, and I'm looking forward to going into some of that with you. So some of the common themes that I'm seeing are either really wanting to deepen in partnership or understand our partners better, having just ended partnerships. So some of us are coming out of some long-term partnerships and single, and others are also just looking to deepen in their practice. And I admire all of you for the different reasons that brought you here. On my own journey, I went through quite an intense initiation phase into this healing work where a divorce really catapulted me into all of my childhood wounds and opened up all of my childhood trauma, which was quite extensive and had been deeply buried and dismissed. And through that, I really learned how to come back to my own body and to really return to the emotional wisdom and the capacity that I had to hold and self-soothe myself. And through partnership, we are really brought into this space of deep trigger and deep healing, and how we react or how we respond to these moments where we are confronted with something that reminds us of our history, or that causes us to feel uncomfortable feelings, can make all of the difference. And so this workshop, Creating Conscious Love, is a bit of the work that my husband and I, Ben Goreski, do. He's going to join us in the second half of this workshop. We're going to take a break from 12:15 to 12:30, or I think it's 3:15 to 3:30 for those of you on the East Coast. And so he's going to join for that second half, and we're also going to do some Q&A. So I like to do these workshops really interactive. I don't like to talk for the whole time and wait until the very end. So soon we're going to turn off the chat, but then I'm going to open it up every 20 minutes or so and just make sure that everybody's on the same page and that the questions are answered. So this workshop is geared toward you having the foundational principles of how to build and create a conscious relationship, whether you're in partnership or not. These are the foundational principles that I believe we all need in order to be able to succeed in a relationship, because the truth is that romantic relationship is one of the most intense containers that we could possibly grow in, right? And so if we don't have the tools and if we don't have that relationship to self-built, then it can be really, really tough. So we're going to dive into that today. So I'm going to just share my screen here. So we're going to begin with the very first question, which is, what is a conscious relationship and how do we create one? Now, when we first enter this space of conscious relationship, most of us, our minds will go to, well, it requires that we have another person in order to have a conscious relationship. And of course, that would make sense because relationship is often referred to as, two people or more in a dynamic. In this model, we're looking at conscious relationship as our relationship to all things that are an extension of our being. So our relationship to spirit, which is going to be unique to you, maybe that's God, maybe that is some other form of connection to source energy. There's a relationship to self, which is really primary. That's the foundation, because how connected we are to ourselves, how regulated we are in our nervous systems, how well we know our own minds and our own needs and desires and core values will determine how our relationships look. Relationship to nature. I believe that when we have a more conscious relationship to nature, how we engage with the earth, how we treat her, how we respect all living beings, how we consume, that relationship there is also important. It's also a reflection of our relationships. And then relationship to other, meaning a partner, our friends, family, right? Any other being who we're in a relationship with. And so we're going to start with the relationship to self. The conscious relationship to self is our nervous system patterns, it's our conscious awareness, and it's our willingness to grow. So many of us have kind of spent our lives jumping in and out of relationship. Maybe we're in monogamous relationships, so we're serial monogamous, where we just go from one relationship to the next. Perhaps we are dating a lot of people or multiple people at the same time. Maybe our relationships never get past the certain mark. Maybe we have like a certain time limit where our pattern just sort of, oh, time is up. And all of these things really fall into play with our patterns, right? So if our nervous system pattern is to not get too close, right, to have certain defense mechanisms or coping mechanisms that activate at a certain time, or to be drawn to a certain dynamic, or to avoid certain containers of intimacy that might bring up too much, then we're going to have to look at that in order to deepen in our relationship to self. The other piece is that many of us don't actually know what our core values are. And I talk about core values a lot. And this is something, if you have a journal now, you could even start to think about, what are the things that I value the most? Because our values really are sort of at the top of the list when we're working on creating a new partnership, or when we want to engage with new people, when we want to qualify a person to be in relationship with. How do we know if a relationship is more than just passion or sexual attraction or the chemistry that we feel? How do we know if there's actually potential to cultivate a relationship or a life together? A big part of this is core values. And I'll give you an example. For me, some of my core values are generosity, honesty, respect, authenticity, integrity, loyalty. And so if we don't know what we value, then we might find ourselves repeating these patterns where we're drawn to certain people who maybe have one or two of the things that we value. Maybe they're really playful. Maybe we really value sex, right? Like we like physical touch and connection, which a lot of us do. And that's not a bad thing at all. But if we find people who only represent a few of our core values and the rest are missing, then we might not be able to actually deepen in relationship. And so I like to think about the courting phase or the dating phase, when we're really getting to know someone, as an opportunity to reveal, to ask questions, to be curious, to be vulnerable, and to really treat it almost like a little bit of a negotiation, not in a hostile way, but in a playful way, where we can say, here's who I am, and here's what I value, and here's what I want to create. What is it that you value? What is it that you want to create? And we can't do these things if we haven't taken that time to really build that relationship to self. So if we're operating on the nervous system pattern where we are feeling very anxious or afraid to be abandoned, or we don't want to be rejected, right? And we feel that activation in our systems where we really want to be chosen. If there's this overemphasis on being chosen, then we might forget about the qualification process, because what we really want is just to stop the sensations in our body of, oh my goodness, like, do they like me? Do they approve of me? Am I chosen? And this happens in conflict as well, which we're going to get into later in the workshop for those of you who find this pattern coming up in conflict, right? And that can look like running, or it can look like chasing, or it can look like, self-abandoning. So there are two types of relationship. There's, conscious and conventional, or I like to refer them as a vacuum relationship and a power grid relationship. A vacuum relationship is the kind of relationship where it's just taking up all of the energy. It's sucking up all of the energy one way, and nothing's coming back. And if something is coming back out of the vacuum, when your vacuum's broken and it's spitting stuff out, and it's not good stuff, right? So there's just a one-way street. A power grid relationship is where we are cycling the energy. We are redistributing it out to each other in the partnership, but also into our communities. I think one of the most powerful hallmarks of a truly conscious and nourishing relationship is when we both have the energy, or more of us, however many you have in your partnership, when we have the energy to be of service, right? And this isn't all the time. We go through cycles and phases in our lives where we really don't have the capacity, and that's okay. But often you can tell if a relationship is strengthening you or weakening you by how much energy you have, not only to give to yourself and to your partner, but how much energy you might have to share with the world through whatever your gift is. And that could be some type of art. It could be dance. It could be your job. It could be what you do for giving, right? Maybe you have some sort of volunteer work. Maybe it's something as simple as, can you help out your neighbor? Right? Do you have the energy to help out a neighbor if they need something? Right? And so we can really notice when we're feeling nourished or when we're feeling undernourished by how much energy we have to give. Right? And relationships are a big piece of this. Our relationships are meant to be these safe havens. But often what happens is they turn into these really intense, volatile containers because so much of our history is coming up. So much of our programming, so many of our fears, many of them that we're not actually aware of, right? They're all coming up to the surface. And so a lot of times we think, okay, well, I'm going to do all of this work, and then I'm going to call in a conscious relationship, and it's just going to be conscious from the beginning, right? That's what we would like. In reality, it can take many, many years to build and cultivate a conscious relationship. My husband and I spent probably about 4 years working through our patterns and our communication blocks and some of the nervous system patterns that we had going on from childhood before we really got to this place where things started to feel really easeful, right? And now we're 7 years in, and it's really getting to that point where we're like, sometimes things are just so easeful that we're like looking for stimulation. We're like, what can we bring into our life? What kind of project can we do together? What can we create? And that's what we want to work toward, right? Is that you have enough energy to create things together instead of the conflict and the drama and the over processing, right? Which is, it is a journey. And so these tools that I'm going to go through with you are a way for you to hold yourself and for your partners to hold you and themselves through this, because it isn't easy. And there are going to be many times along the way in partnership where we wonder, is this really worth it? Is this working? Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe I should just find a new partner. And the truth is that nobody can tell you whether or not that's true. And many partnerships are meant to end. But there are a few signs that a partnership has the potential to grow. And that is, both of you are willing, truly willing, with the deep desire to be together and to grow. If you have that, then you are already 10 steps ahead. Because you cannot get there if only one of you wants to do the work and one of you doesn't. There needs to be 2 or more willing participants who are like, yeah, I want to be aware of my own patterns. I want to take responsibility for myself in this partnership. I want to contribute to the safety, and I want to understand you and myself better. We have to have that green light, that full yes from both people. Okay. And so that's what we're going toward when we're thinking about creating a conscious relationship. And so a conscious relationship is not a perfect relationship. There's no such thing. You are going to have bad days. You're going to have hairy monster moments where you are not your best self and they're not their best self. And that's totally normal. And we're going to go into how to keep the energy clear in this next part. And this is a method that I like to share pretty much with everyone who is in a relationship or even in really intimate friendships. And it's called the clearing method. And the clearing method is something that Ben and I started learning with a teacher actually right when we started dating, we went into these Tantra containers together. And we started doing therapy together about 2 months into our relationship. And so we learned these practices for communicating really deeply, honestly, vulnerably, while also creating space for listening and understanding. But I want to walk you through this process. And if you can get these slides after, we'll send them out to you. And if you have any questions about this, after I explain this process, then I'm going to open up the chat just for a few moments. So the clearing method, one of the things that's really important is to request a clearing, right? Before we actually do a clearing with a partner, before we begin to like open up to all of the things that we're feeling or the things that are upsetting us or whatever it is that's bothering us, we want to actually ask them if they have the space and the time to listen. Do they have the capacity in their nervous systems? We also want to make sure that we are in a space. We're in a rooted space, right? And so when we're activated, when we're feeling that intensity, that electricity in our nervous systems, if we're feeling really anxious or if we're feeling really angry, feeling really upset in some way, that isn't the time to sit down and try to process the event. That's a time to ask for a hug. That's a time to cuddle your pet. That's a time to call a friend. It's time to maybe, do a somatic practice. Maybe you've learned some along the way in this program that you find soothing for yourself. Maybe there's something that you do to calm your system. So you draw on those tools and those resources so you can come back to your body, right? And then when we request a clearing, we're asking basically to set an appointment to talk to our partner. And this is also an imago method that Harville and Helen Hendricks use. And I'll touch on that again down the road as well. They have a very different format, but it's very similar in that you always make sure that your partner is actually available. And that when you set this appointment, that you both show up fully, right? And so it's important to remember that sometimes your partner might not be in the space, right? If they're like working upstairs in their office and you come and interrupt them when they've got their headphones on and you're feeling upset, maybe they aren't in the space to stop. And so as the partner who's being invited, if you say, no, I'm not available right now, then that's your job to say, but I am available when. Right? So these are nervous system principles in relationship. We never leave our partner hanging. We don't disappear without saying, I'm going to, take a break, take some space, go for a walk, do this, go to the gym, whatever it is. I will be back at this time. Where I'm feeling, I can't do this with you right now. I'm feeling overstimulated or I'm too angry at the moment. I don't want to talk yet. And I can talk to you at this time at 4:00 or at 7:00 p.m. tonight. Or, would it be okay if I had 24 hours to sit with this? I'm feeling a lot of intensity. I need some time to journal. Can we talk tomorrow at, 1 p.m.? Right. And so this is a two-way street. So it's always our responsibility to remember to nurture and love our partner in their most vulnerable state. Right. And so we can also relate to this as the inner child, however you want to view it. But notice how it feels in your body when someone just says, no, I can't, or no, I don't want to talk to you about that thing. I just want to shut you out. Leave me alone. Right. And then there's no, but we're going to talk at this time. That doesn't feel good. Right. And for those of us who are the person who tends to shut down, it can be a real practice to lean in more, to show up a little bit more. But if we're the one who's often pursuing, if we're the one who's often requesting conflict resolution, if we're the one who's often wanting to work it out faster, then some of our job is going to be to learn how to self-soothe so that we can be regulated enough that the partner who usually needs a little bit more space feels like they have that permission to take the time that they need. And then they feel safe to come into the dynamic, right? Because if you think about it like this, when you're like moving towards someone, they either have the opportunity to move towards you, and this is like a secure connection, right? So you're moving towards each other. Or if someone's coming at you really, really intensely, what are you going to do, right? You might start to back away. It's like simple energetics, right? So if we're feeling like somebody is really intensely coming at us with this big energy of demand and needing something from us right away, that we feel overstimulated, then the natural response is to move away or to shut down or to leave or to retreat, right? These are just basic patterns in our systems. And so both of us have to know, okay, well, I'm more the person who tends to go into my little hidey hole. I'm the person who tends to pursue. You can discuss this with your partner, or if you're on your own, if you're not in a partnership right now, write down, okay, well, I'm the person who tends to chase or pursue. Maybe I feel a little bit more anxious in conflict, or I tend to avoid or shut down. And if you know that, then you can sort of say, okay, well, then I guess this is my work when conflict happens, right? And I have a few tools that we'll send out after this workshop for those of you who feel like you need more help self-soothing. One of them is an inner child meditation. And then, of course, body scanning is always really helpful as well. So after we have requested the clearing and we're in a space to do so, then we want to set the space, meaning we don't want a lot of chaos around, music is down, there's not a lot of noise, and the space feels calm. We're not drinking alcohol or using substances when we're doing clearings. So everybody's in a clear state of mind, unless you're in some sort of like psychedelic container that, you've designed, and then that's a different story. But, if you've just gone out for a night and you've had a few drinks and then something comes up, that's not the time to do the clearing, right? So setting the space is knowing the environment is clear, and everybody's feeling clear. Now, this piece is important, using a chime or a timer. Why do we do this? It's literally proven that when we talk for too long about something in a partnership, when we're having a conflict, we can flood a person, right? Not only do we get lost, but they get lost, and then they get overwhelmed, and then they shut down, or we shut down, or we're not feeling heard. And so we want to actually put a time limit on how long we're going to share for. So I usually suggest, set, if you're going to do body scans and sensation check-ins first, I'd say, 3 minutes each of sharing. So you can set your timer for 5 minutes. Okay. Now, in the beginning of the clearing, let's say you're both sitting across from each other and you're just breathing for a moment, you're making eye contact that's comfortable. I always suggest, practice being in eye contact with your partner if that's something that you feel like you have the capacity for. And really just notice on each side, what are you feeling in your body? And each person, so if you have the timer for 5 minutes, then you have partner A, partner B. This works best in dyads. If you have more than one partner, you can take turns doing this with different partners, but it's best to just do one-on-one for this. Okay. Otherwise we can flood and we can get overwhelmed. If you want to create more than one-on-one in this dynamic, then I would recommend that you set the timer for shorter bursts, and that you take breaks. You take a lot of breaks for sensation check-ins. Okay. So in that clearing, so let's say I'm partner A, so I'm making eye contact with you, I'm breathing. And before I get into what I'm actually feeling about this conflict that we just had, I'm just going to tell you that right now I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling a little bit scared that you're going to leave. And the sensations in my body are some tension in my chest. I'm feeling a little bit of tingling in my thighs and a little bit of tightness in my neck. Okay. And what I desire is to feel your presence with me, for you to understand my feelings, and for you to show up on time for our dates. Okay. So this is an example of sort of setting the tone for safety, while also you're checking in with your body, you're attuning to your nervous system so that you can stay in your center. You're also letting your partner know, hey, I'm here, I'm responsible for myself, and I require your presence, right? And so then when you've done that, then you have your 3 minutes to share. And so we're not focusing on, our partner's flaws. We're not criticizing or blaming. Inevitably, this is going to happen sometimes in clearings, right? Because we're having a clearing because there was a conflict. And so it takes practice to not point out the flaws or to criticize or to blame or to fall into that pattern. We all do it. So if we notice ourselves, we can say, I'm sorry, I'm falling into that, I want to just take responsibility. So let me try that again, or, hey, that didn't come out the way that I wanted it to. Can I say it a different way? Right. But what we want to do in this clearing is we want to say, here are the things that hurt me or that made me angry or that crossed my boundary or that didn't feel good. And here's what I would like to experience instead. And it always helps when we share what we're willing to do differently ourselves. It can help our partner let down their guard. If we say, I realized that when I came into the kitchen, my energy was kind of aggressive with you and I was a bit dismissive and I could have probably said that nicer. So I'm really sorry. And, when you responded that way and you snapped at me and then you just walked out of the room, I felt really abandoned. And I'd really like it if we could, do things different, and here's what I'm willing to do. So it's just these little moments where we are asking for what we need, but we're also sharing what upset us and what hurt us. Okay. And then we switched our partner and they get the 5 minutes. And the first couple of minutes can be the sensations check in, the feelings check in. So noticing what you're feeling in your body, noticing your sensations. If you want, oftentimes Ben and I will just eye gaze for a few moments before we do clearings or check-ins. So you can do that. If that doesn't feel comfortable for you, if you just both want to breathe and be in your own bodies for a few moments, you can do that. And then it's your partner's turn to share. Now, the important thing about the clearing method is that this is not a listen to respond game. This is a share from my heart and my vulnerable self. Really be clear on what I'm asking for. Maybe this reminded you, maybe something that your partner did, maybe it really wasn't okay. And it did remind you of something from your childhood or something that happened to you in your history. And that brought up a lot for you, and it maybe in your clearing, you're sharing, hey, this reminds me of when I was in high school and this happened, and I feel really unsafe. And I'm guessing that you don't want to make me feel unsafe. And I know that you love me, but when you respond that way, or when this happens, this is what happens for me. And it would help me feel safe and loved if instead of that, we could try this, right? And so it changes the game when we do this clearing method, when we clear this way. And you can do more than one round, but I don't recommend doing more than 3 in one sitting because it can get overwhelming. So try to be concise. And it doesn't mean pre-formulating everything, but you're not listening to your partner to respond to them to defend yourself. You're listening, and then you're sharing from your heart. And you can respond to things, but you don't need to be responding to every little thing. You want to stay in your process as well, which is why we do these sensation check-ins and these feelings check-ins. Because in conflict, what often happens is one or more people have actually left their bodies and they're now enmeshing. And so the sensations and the feelings and the reactions of our partner, we just take everything on. And then everybody gets dysregulated and nobody can communicate clearly. So if we stay in our own bodies and we're aware of what we're feeling, and we're also aware that we're not responsible for saving or fixing our partner, we're just here to listen and to hold space and to show up as best we can, then we're doing it, right? So I want to open up for questions before I dive into this piece, just because that practice is quite pivotal for changing relationship conflict. So let me just see if I can stop sharing for a moment here. There we go. All right. Okay, so could we open up the chat for a few moments, and let's just see if anybody has a different process for a big wound like an affair. So, okay, so the clearing method is, you can use the clearing method if you are working through an affair, but if you're confronting an affair for the first time, this process probably isn't the very best for that. Truly, with something like an affair, it really is best to have somebody else supporting you, right? Because there's so much going on really for both of you in that I find if one person has to hold space for the other, it's too much because both people are feeling so much intensity. And I also know that the Gottmans do have a lot of work specifically on affairs, and I have trained with them a little bit. I like the Gottmans. There's also Esther Perel. Her philosophies are a little bit different than some of the philosophies that I work with. But if her work resonates with you, that's one of the things that she specializes in as well, is affairs. I personally I'm more on the Gottman train for those types of things. It just depends on your relationship dynamics. Okay. Any advice for a partner who is likely to get defensive? Yeah. So, I mean, so we all have defensiveness, and we have different levels of defensiveness. When there's a really defensive partner, again, this comes down to willingness, right? Is this partner being cornered into having a clearing, or have they really willingly brought themselves here? Because when we are the pursuer, we may not be aware of how much we're kind of energetically dominating our partner in some of these moments and these conflicts where we're like, no, we got to work it out. And like, we're going to do this thing. And maybe they're just not ready. So really there's an attunement happening where we need to be responsible for our own systems. And we need to be able to say, you know, I don't have the capacity for this right now, or I do. But if there is a lot of defensiveness, and I can relate to that, Ben and I both have different levels of defensiveness, and we've both had to really work on owning our own stuff in those clearings and really being mindful of the language that we use. So really staying away from the criticism, staying away from the blame, focusing on what you're feeling, what you need. And remember that if our nervous systems are really dysregulated and our partner is sharing their big feelings, we might be taking on their feelings as though they're our fault. Or if we come from family systems where a parent over relied on us, right? Or they parentified us, or things were really dysregulated in the home, then it can be really hard to be there for someone else's big emotions without feeling responsible for them or without feeling threatened by them. And so those are also moments of opportunity for you to say, hey, I just want to let you know, like, I know that you love me, you know, and I trust you. You know, I'm here with you. And the reason that I'm sharing this is because I want to be with you. And I, if you're interpreting this as me, you know, blaming you or thinking that, you know, you're a bad person or that you did this intentionally, I want you to know that I don't believe that. Right. And so it does take some humility on our part as well when we have the more defensive partner to diffuse the situation. And some of us might say, well, that's not fair, right? That's exhausting for me because why do I always have to be the one? And so, you know, sometimes these are the containers where we actually need, again, we need a support person. And if we can work through it, which often we can, then it just takes practice. And for the defensive person, it's noticing, why do I feel defensive when I am in these states? Am I feeling attacked? Right? Am I feeling criticized or judged? And how does that remind me of my history? You know, how is that a familiar feeling for me? Working with the avoidant partner. If you are not the avoidant partner, you're the pursuer, then again, this is about self-soothing and giving space. This is why we go to the relationship to self so often. That's why my book is called Becoming the One, because the one is you, right? You are the one. And so when we are the one pursuing the avoidant, there are different levels, right? But usually, you know, we all have different degrees of, you know, avoidance or pursuing in our nervous systems. And we don't need to over pathologize that or put ourselves in containers or boxes, because the truth is that we express differently through different relationships, through different scenarios, through different triggers. And that's actually a pretty normal thing, right? So one of the things that we can always do is notice when we are grasping externally or looking for our partner to, you know, help us resolve a feeling or a sensation because we're really uncomfortable with what we're feeling. And instead of chasing them down to try to get them to show up now, return to our body, return to our sensations, do our body scan, do our feelings check in, and then, you know, do some sort of practice. Maybe it's an inner child meditation, maybe it's a somatic practice that you've learned in this program. Maybe, you know, I find a lot of comfort in nature, so I go out in the forest, you know, go for a walk, go to the ocean. If you don't have that around, you know, go sit with your plant, you know, cuddle your pet. There are things that you can do to soothe yourself. And remember to check in with your own feelings and where you're wanting to kind of escape them, because that's often what's happening when we're over pursuing, is we are now focused on, you know, okay, I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to focus on you. And this is something that's kind of left out of the conversation with this anxious avoidant dance that happens, is where are we self-abandoning by pursuing this other person? Now, what I found is that just like that energetic dance, when you give space, they actually have room to come towards you now. And this was true for Ben and I, right? So the more that I gave him space and gave him permission to need time, because really sometimes we call people avoidant, but actually they're just the type, they need more time to be with themselves before they're ready. And that's also fine. We usually, the person who needs more space always ends up with the person who needs less space. That's just how it works. So can we just give them permission? And there is mutual responsibility to shift and to grow in our patterns, right? It's not just a one-way street. So for the person who tends to avoid or shut down more, again, your job is to practice leaning in a little bit more. Practice communicating. I can't now, but I can at this time, you know, or I need this amount of time. I need to go for a walk by myself, or I need to go journal, or I need to go do this. I need to call my friend first to process some of this, and then I can come and talk to you. Right. And so one of the things that Ben and I did when we were in our early stages of power struggle, I think we were like a year and a half into our relationship. And, you know, we were conflicting all the time about silly things, because that's what happens when you enter into a new relationship. He would need space, and he would need to go to the gym to work out, or to go sit in the sauna, you know, and I would feel abandoned because my inner child, you know, was abandoned. I was abandoned when I was a little kid. Like, I was physically abandoned and dropped off at a foster home and left there. And then, you know, that happened many times throughout my childhood. And so when he would leave, I would feel totally abandoned. And so we made an agreement that when he would go out, he would say, I'm going and I'll be back in 2 hours, and then we can talk. And that was it. And then, you know, he did his job. And now my responsibility was to learn how to self-soothe. So he, you know, he held up his end of the agreement. And now mine was to be responsible for my own emotions. And the more that I learned how to practice and self-soothe, the more I was able to develop emotional maturity, the more space he had, the more safe he felt to come in and to share and to have clearings where we both felt like we could show up, right? So an avoidant partner is generally the person who tends to minimize their feelings. Maybe they don't know how to take up space. So something you can do is just invite them, you know, to share a little bit without pressuring. How to deal with old wounds when the other person isn't willing to own their side and do repair and expects you to just get over it. I wouldn't say you just deal with that. I'd say, like, that's not a healthy dynamic, right? Like, we can't just continue to be in relationships where there's no repair and there's just constant emotional or psychic injury, and then we're expected to just get over it. The truth is that's just how we build resentment, and eventually a relationship like that falls apart. So something has to shift. Some of us just end up settling in relationships like that, and then eventually we grow apart. We call this like the dead zone or the twilight zone. Harville and Helen Hendricks, they call it parallel, where you end up just sort of settling and living parallel lives, but you're really not connected emotionally at all anymore. And that's what happens when you don't repair and you're not willing to on your side. The best thing that we can always do in relationship is just truly show up in our hearts, own what we can, you know, be as honest about our role as we can. And then we can know that we've tried our best. And if there's still no repair, if there's still no reciprocity, you know, there's no willingness, then sometimes that is grounds for shifting, you know, the dynamic or ending the dynamic. And, it's really tough for anyone to say in any circumstance, unless it's an abusive situation, that it's not right, because sometimes these dynamics play out for a while before they resolve. But often what I found is that in these types of partnerships, it's often, unfortunately, it's not until the partner who has been ready and willing for a long time, it's not until they get fed up and they decide that they want to end the partnership, that the person who has been kind of dragging their heels and unwilling, all of a sudden now they're willing. It's like, oh, and so when I work with people like that, I often say, like this person is going to eventually get tired of this dynamic and they are going to end it. And then you're going to want to do the work. So you might want to consider just, dipping your toes in the water now, before it's too late. But at the same time, this is a path that, many of us have to walk. I've walked this myself. I've been the unwilling person in a relationship, in my history. And so try not to blame yourself if you've been that person, and try not to make it wrong if you've had a relationship that ended, because I really believe that the path that we are on in relationship is perfect. It's what we're meant to experience, right? It's our relationship path. And so as long as we are, continuing to come back to love and to grow, then we're on track, right? So it's okay if relationships end sometimes, as long as we feel like we've done our best. Or if we didn't do our best, that we can see now, some of the things that, we could do differently in our next relationship, right? That's growth, that's progress. Roughly how long would a clearing be? How long would it last? 10 to 15 minutes in total after the 3-minute shares? Yeah, I mean, so let's say you do 5 minutes each on the first part, right? Because you're doing your sensations check-ins and your 3 minutes clearing. I would say like 25 minutes most. Shouldn't be too long. The thing is that, when we're talking and we're clearing in conflict, things can escalate quite quickly, right? Our heart rates start to go and we start to get activated by each other. And talking isn't always the best solution. Talking isn't always the best solution. Sometimes we just we need to regulate together. And then we need to say a few things like, I'm responsible for this. I'm sorry for that. Here's what I'm willing to do differently. Sometimes we need to talk for a long time, but other times we don't. And so in the next portion of this, I'm going to talk about just a few other things that we can do if we're not going to do a clearing, or before we're doing a clearing, or after we're doing a clearing, to sort of get back into repair together. What if after multiple clearing sessions, partners don't change? Well, here's the funny thing. Most of the time, the common conflicts that you have in your partnership, you're going to have those for the rest of your partnership. And that's just a fact. It's proven that a lot of times the things that we conflict about don't ever really change. What can change is how we respond or how we show up. But some of these core themes that we come into our relationships with, our core differences, those things are there. And it doesn't matter who we're with, we're always going to have differences. There's always going to be something that isn't perfect, right? People often don't change after just a few clearings. Change is a very long process. Like I said, I think it took Ben and I about 4 years to get to a point where we felt like we had really learned how to conflict well. 4 years, right? Like, so conflict wasn't going well for that amount of time. So, and now, like I said, it's been about 7 years, and we're, now we're like in a really clear place. Like, conflict rarely happens. If it does, it's very short. We don't waste much time on it anymore. It's not of interest to us anymore. But we have to be willing to give time and space to these things, and focus too, not so much on changing our partners, but on how we're showing up again, right? How are we showing up? And if we're both doing that, we take the pressure off of pressuring each other to be different. Change happens. It does. The other thing is that I think we focus so much when we're in these tension periods on partners changing and being different. And we want to also bring a lot of appreciation into that dynamic if we're both going to feel safe enough to show up more. We're going to talk about that after too. Appreciation is a really big one. In a partnership where there's abusive qualities or gaslighting, yeah, so in abusive dynamics, again, these tools are meant for two people who are willing. I'm not saying that you're going to be perfect. The truth is that sometimes we're going to say or do things that, come across as hurtful, and we're going to have to repair with our partner. We're only human. That happens. But abuse is a whole other level, right? And when we're in an abusive dynamic, we can't actually practice conscious relationship tools unless there's support there and we're safe. And when we're in an abusive dynamic, we're not safe. And so you can't really go deep with another person or reveal your tenderness or share your childhood wounds or anything like that if there's gaslighting and there's abuse, because that will be used against you, right? And that's not safe. So if it's truly an abusive dynamic, then seek outside support as fast as you can. Make sure that you are safe first. And remember that not every partnership has the potential or the capacity, right? If we have a partner who's just simply unwilling, has no desire to be responsible for themselves in the relationship, there's nothing that you can say or do or be that is going to change that. So then your job is to be there for yourself, right? And so we have to really, and it's hard when we're in these dynamics because some things that are not normal start to feel normal, or because we grew up with that, or because that's what we've known, it seems normal in some way, or it seems familiar to us. So it can be hard to catch that. And so that's where talking to other people, or even doing workshops like this and saying, okay, this is what a healthy dynamic is supposed to be like. Right. And so if you need support, on my website, risingwoman.com, there's a resources page for different resources for abuse and things like that. So if there's somebody that you need to talk to, then I would suggest doing that, because you can't really go into these dynamics one-sided. Okay, let's see here. Okay, there's a lot here, so I won't be able to get to all of these at the moment. I'm just going to quickly scan through and just see. Okay, this is a good one. Would it be appropriate to ask someone to use different language during a clearing if they're stating their reality as truth, as in you did this, instead of it feels like you did this, when you feel like your intentions are being misunderstood? I think it's a dangerous game when we're in these containers and we start to focus on correcting each other. Of course, we would prefer that everybody be using responsible language, right? Like, I'm responsible for me, you're responsible for you. I would suggest not correcting your partner in the moment, and instead, if you're feeling misunderstood, say that when you clear, hey, I want to share that I'm feeling really misunderstood. And, sometimes when I hear you say things that I did, my true intention doesn't feel seen, right? And what I actually was trying to say or trying to do was XYZ. And sometimes I feel really, unseen, and I feel invisible because it seems like you think that I, had these intentions for you, and I actually really love you, and this is what I actually intended. Sometimes it just helps to just kind of accept that, there was somebody said something that didn't feel good, and instead just talk about that feeling. Because when we get into these dynamics of correcting each other all of the time, and of course it's going to happen sometimes, but if we can avoid doing it all the time, the ideal is that we learn and we grow together, and that we start to begin to actually correct ourselves, right? Sometimes we do need to say something, and that's okay. We can be a simple request like, would you mind just, not using accusatory language, because it causes my nervous system to feel really triggered, and like, it would just help me if you would just tell me your experience instead. You can say things like that, but sometimes we need support when things are that heated. Okay. If we've only experienced toxic relationships, is there a way to create initial safety to be open to experiencing healthy relationships? It feels like a far leap that almost feels unattainable, which I know isn't true, but is there a way to close the gap? Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. It's actually what my book is all about, Becoming the One, because Many of us come from those histories, myself included. I had no template for healthy relationship. I only had template for chaos and abandonment and abuse and violence. I did not know what it looked like to be in any form of healthy relationship with anyone, literally. And so it took a long time and a lot of unhealthy, unsafe relationship dynamics to figure it out, to find my way to healing. But it is always possible. Absolutely. Right. The beautiful thing about our nervous systems is that they can rewire, we can heal, we can learn how to feel more safe in our bodies. It takes time, but it is possible. And is also, again, rooted back to that relationship that you have with yourself. So often when we are wired for chaos, then one of the best things that we can do is learn how to soothe ourselves, learn how to find out, who am I? What do I value? What do I love? What are my dreams? What are my desires? How can I learn how to really enjoy spending time with myself, taking myself out on dates, right? And so in my program, Becoming the One, and in my book too, I talk about, the self dates to the secure self, taking yourself out with the sole intention of just being more secure in yourself and really learning to love your alone time, and so this can look like just setting up a nice soothing bath, or it can look like, dancing in your living room, or making yourself a delicious dinner, or, just going for a stroll in nature, something like that, just on your own, journaling, being with yourself. So the more that we get to know ourselves, then there is really more potential for us to tune into what our history looks like and what our emotional themes are. Meaning these are the things that I'm used to. So these are the things that might feel normal to me that really maybe aren't actually that safe. And this is who I am and what I value and what I want. And I'm learning how to feel my body and my own sensations so that I know when something doesn't feel right. Right? Because when we're conditioned for chaos, what's happening really is that our bodies we've kind of left the building in a way, right? We've left the building. So now we have learned how to ignore red flags because we had to do that to survive. We didn't have the opportunity or the option to change something, so for safety and survival, we just had to ignore them. So that becomes a pattern. So we'll see these little things along the way, or we'll feel something in our body and we'll just dismiss it. And so healing that pattern really does require that we tune in. And so I would suggest, every day, throughout the day, just take a moment. What am I feeling? Notice where I am in the room. It's a simple practice of tuning into the sensations in my body, noticing my breath, while also noticing where I am, right? Being in my body and also being in the space. Okay. And so just have one final question here about when we're doing clearing sessions to a partner who has no knowledge of somatics. The truth is that you don't need any knowledge of somatics to do a clearing. You just need to be willing to follow the practice, right? So all you need to do is be willing to notice what you're feeling and try to name a sensation in your body. And maybe the partner who has no knowledge of their sensations and their feelings, who's never done that before, they'll think it's weird, and maybe it'll be a struggle for them. And that's okay, right? Ben and I work with people in our couples program all of the time who have never even made eye contact while they're having a conflict. And so it's okay. Like, we don't need to be therapists or mindful practitioners or meditators, or, we don't need to have this big background to be able to do this. We just need to be willing to feel, to be willing to tune into ourselves, to be willing to try. And it doesn't have to be this big elaborate thing. Like, you don't have to name 100 sensations that you're feeling or be super aware of every nuance. Like, it's not a competition. So if your partner just says, I'm feeling pissed off and I'm not feeling any sensation in my body today, then that's fine. Let them say that. That's their experience right now. It's not your job to coach them into it. Let them work themselves through this, right? We can inch our way there. It's not a rush. there's no rush. So I would just say no emphasis on, our partner needing to have all the knowledge that we have and like having to watch every video that we've watched and take every course and read all of the books. Maybe they will and maybe they won't. And sometimes they can get there anyways. Sometimes our partners can surprise us, so just we have to give that chance. Yeah, great. Okay. So I'm going to turn my slides back on here, and we're going to I think we're going to address a few of the questions that have come up. All right. So we're going to talk about a few other tools here. So there is the Imago method, which I have trained in with Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt. But you can also find Imago practitioners and therapists who can actually support you in using dialogues that are very specific, like it's very scripted. So if you and your partner are deep into these conflicts that are recurring and that you just can't seem to get out of it, it's like, oh my God, we're trapped in this hell together. Like, why can we not get over this conflict, right? We've been there in those things where we just keep looping. That's a really good opportunity to do Imago. So on their website, and I will, if somebody can maybe write down, one of the assistants can maybe just note down that I said that I would send this, because I want to send the link to their website, because they actually have, I think, a free sheet where you can download one of the scripts for free if you want to try doing it on your own. But also working with somebody who can kind of hold that container for you is really nice. This is especially helpful if, clearings aren't working, we're getting too activated, the same fight just keeps happening, we're exhausted. Imago method is really about focusing on our childhood wounds and our patterns from our first family, and how we're bringing that into our dynamics, and how most of our conflicts are representative of that. And it's incredible. I've worked with couples where it's just mind-blowing how similar each partner is to their parent, right? And so there's just, it's mind-blowing. Even Ben and I, we went to Esalen Institute to work with them. And we did this practice. We spent 3 days doing these workshops and doing the Imago workups. And you basically, you work up, yourself and what you're most attracted to, what you love most about your partner, and what you loved most about your parent, and what you felt like you didn't get. And in the end, even we had been in this work for so many years. I think we were like 5 years into our relationship at this point, right? And we were shocked at some of the new things that we had discovered of how perfectly we fit into each other's script from the past, things that we still hadn't caught. So it can be a really powerful method if you feel like, you and your partner really need that extra help. Now, when it comes to nervous system regulation and being able to have the capacity to hold space for yourself and for your partner, somatic experiencing work is something that I usually like to suggest. Doing it individually and couple sessions is nice, and touch work is especially pleasant if you find a practitioner who can do touch work, because it can really help the body release some of that stress and those patterns, those habitual responses, like even things like, if we're a door slammer, or we tend to get really defensive, or we tend to shut down, or we tend to, get really jealous or whatever. Like a lot of those are nervous system patterns. There's something being activated. And talking about it isn't always going to help. Sometimes it will. I did a lot of talk sessions, a lot of like transpersonal therapy, but doing somatic experiencing work helped the body and the nervous system release the patterns. And so if you want to build and deepen your capacity to be with big emotions and big sensations without feeling, blown over by your partner, or feeling like you need to rescue or save them, or feeling like you desperately need them to do something for you to be okay. Sometimes these are signs that your nervous system could use a little bit of support. And if you go to, I think it's somaticexperiencing.org, I'll have to find the exact website, but there is a list of practitioners like all over the world for that. Another one is touch instead of talk, right? So we've been talking a lot, but I'm talking a lot about how sometimes talking isn't always the thing, right? one of the agreements that Ben and I made was to sometimes when we were feeling heated and conflict, to just lay down together for a few moments and to touch. Because we actually found that if we were touching, we weren't as activated. We wouldn't get as mad. So we would just, sit across from each other and put our hands on each other's knees, or we would lay down side by side and just cuddle, or we just hold hands. We hold hands. If we're feeling angry at each other, we'll actually sit and hold hands and just look at each other and hold hands. Because it's this physical reminder that there's tenderness between you, that you love each other. And when you touch, you're also calming each other's nervous systems down a little bit, right? You're getting a chance to co-regulate. And it's okay to take a bit of space, right? It's okay to journal or to walk in nature before you come to the clearing. Don't try to resolve conflict when your nervous system is highly activated, right? They've done studies. The Gottmans did studies on I think it was 10,000 couples. And they found that when the heart rate is up, conflict always escalates. 100% of the time. You cannot resolve a conflict if your heart rate is up. Ben and I used to try to do clearings in the bath, right? Maybe we had something come up through the week and we wanted to clear it. And so we'd go run this nice hot bath. And then we'd start fighting. And then we went to this Gottman workshop a few years ago, and they were talking about how, when you get heat in your body or when your heart rate goes up, conflict happens. And we just looked at each other and went, the bath. And we started laughing because it's just how it works. It's a physiological response, right? When we start to get hot, we start to panic. Or if we're activated. So if you notice yourself, I'm really upset right now, then that's not the time, right? Okay. Okay. Just gonna see here how we're doing for time. Great. Okay, so I want to do a quick check-in on just how we're feeling right now before we dive into the next piece, because this is a lot of information, right? It's a lot. So I want to just do a quick feelings check-in. So if you want to just take a moment, we can actually practice some of the tools that we just talked about. So just take a moment to just feel your bum on the seat or back in the chair, wherever you are, if your feet are on the ground. Just take a moment and take a breath, and then just notice what you're feeling. If there are any sensations in your body. And if you feel comfortable sharing, one or two words, how I'm feeling or sensations or this, you can post in the chat. No pressure. You don't have to share if that's not something that you want to do. Let's just take a moment. Beautiful. Mm. Mm. Nice. Just reading all of your thoughts and feelings. This is great. Nice. Okay. So equally discouraged for the work I still need to do and hopeful knowing that I can still work out my dynamics. Yeah. Keep sharing. I just want to speak to that. I want to speak to this discouraged feeling that some of us can get, right? And I've been there, and this happens when we start to do this work and then we start to take full responsibility for our patterns, like how we've shown up in relationship. And then we start to feel almost like it's all our fault and things aren't working because of us, and that, we wrecked it, or that, if only we had done XYZ, then things would be different. And I always like to remind you that, you're not going backwards, you're just going deeper. We're always just going deeper. And the things that we've experienced in relationship, I sort of see us as coming into this container for spiritual growth. I see relationships as a container for growth. And I also see the experiences that we've had as, they've been there for a reason for us, and whether or not, we did things perfectly, that's not the point. The point is that, are you learning something now? And if you're learning something now, then that's, again, that's progress. Excuse me. So it's okay to have not known what you know now. And it's okay that you maybe didn't have the tools, right? It makes sense given your conditioning and your history and your past experiences, why you showed up the way you showed up when you did. And that it makes sense for all of us. And, sometimes we're not willing to do the work in a certain relationship. And there's also a reason for that. I was in a relationship where I wasn't willing, and that relationship ended in deep betrayal. And the truth is that was not the relationship that my soul wanted to grow in. Right. And so just giving ourselves permission to have this human experience without making ourselves wrong. And knowing that, there are people in this world, and there are so many humans on this planet with beautiful hearts, with good intentions, who are willing to lean in with us. And I know that to be true. And I also know that it can feel like there's nobody else out there when we're on this journey. Sometimes it can feel really lonely. So just giving ourselves permission to have all of those feelings, Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate hearing from you all on this. So we have just 5 minutes left until we're going to go for our break. And I'm just going to dive into one more concept here. And then we're going to take a 15-minute break. And when we get back, we're going to finish the presentation with Ben, and then we'll do a bit of Q&A at the end with you. Okay. So here we are. Great. Can see that. Okay. Yay. Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna just start with this. We're not gonna get very deep because we only have a few minutes, but I just want to open up this concept that we're going to talk about, which is how to clear resentments from the past or heal old wounds together, right? One of the most important things, I think, is to remember that this is still individual work, even though we're doing it in the container of partnership. And I don't mean that you need to do it all alone. I don't believe in that. Like, we are such relational beings. The way that we live now in these nuclear family structures with this like very individualistic way of being, I don't actually think that that's very normal for us. I think that's why we have so much depression, and we struggle so much, because we do this individualistic thing that's not actually in our design, right? So that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, when we're looking at our own history, we're looking at our conditioning, we're trying to heal old wounds from the past. When we're doing it together, we're still focusing on our own history. And then we're just being present with our partner as they work through theirs. And we're bringing empathy and compassion and understanding. And we're giving space in the container for that work to happen. We're bringing willingness, right? And so the other piece is also, we have to look at our role in our patterns, but also the unresolved relationships from our history. So we carry our unfinished business, our historical relationships, into our present day relationships. And any betrayals, any hurt feelings, any lingering anger or resentments that we haven't dealt with yet, we will carry those into our relationships, and unconsciously we will project those onto our partner when we're feeling triggered. And that is just the human condition. That is what we do. And so it can be helpful to really look at, who am I still holding on to resentment with? Who am I still holding on to anger with? Are there any relationships from my history? Am I still really angry at my mom, or really feeling unhealed with my father? And we don't need to do the healing with our parents in order to feel complete. Right. And so in a lot of my work, in my book, I do create these forgiveness processes and these rituals for us to move through our anger. And I think, we can't go into all of this today because it would just take so many hours. We don't have so many hours. But just something to keep in mind, right, is how do we carry those historical relationships into our present, and where might those relationship themes be showing up again, right? The emotional themes are the things that we're really familiar with feeling frustrated, unheard, abandoned, unloved, not good enough, unimportant, too much, right? That stuff is historical. Having a partner to share your inner journey with is a gift. Cherish each other's vulnerability. It's sacred. What does this mean? It means that when somebody shares their heart with you, or they reveal something tender to them, we never, ever, ever cross the boundary of using that against them in a conflict or in any way. And we should expect that that should not happen in our relationships. That if we share something, that it's held with tenderness, right? So just knowing, when we go into these containers together, it's such an honor to listen when your partner has something to share. And you are not your partner's therapist, and they are not yours, right? We're not here to be each other's therapists. That's not what doing the work is together. Doing the work is both of you, being responsible for your minds and emotions, practicing showing up more regulated together, helping each other co-regulate, showing up in a way where you're like, hey, I want to be a good partner to you. I want you to feel safe. I want you to feel loved. They're doing the same for you. But it's not about like, oh, well, let me explore, all of this for you and hold all of the space in the world. And let me like create this really safe bubble so that, you don't have to feel any of those bad things again. And that, if this, let me just take care of it. Let me just fix it. It's just when we get into parentifying, and starting to like mother or father our partners as if we're their parent. Not only does that kill chemistry, but what it does is we sort of rob them of the opportunity to mature and to be responsible for their own path, right? And so we want to get ourselves out of that habit of wanting to fix or save and just be with. Okay. And that's sometimes a tough one. We get into these dynamics where we're in the saving, fixing pattern. So with that, I want to take a break. So if you resonate with some of that, maybe you want to keep journaling for a few minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to play, or I can leave this up actually, I think, but I'm going to play some music for you guys just while I take a little break here. And if you want to get up and stretch, get some water, maybe move your body a little bit, maybe you need something to eat, maybe you need to poke your head out for some fresh air, whatever you need to do. And we'll come back at 12:30 or 3:30 and we will continue. Sound good?
For the second part of this course, we welcome Ben Goreski, founder at Evolving Man. Ben is a coach and counselor and an explorer of consciousness. He works with men both individually and in groups to find their truth, their power, and their freedom. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Hi, everybody.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen again, and we are going to just dive right into the following presentation that we have left. Let's see here, and then we'll open up for questions. Okay, so before we move on, I want to touch finally, somebody sent me a message while we were on break, just about this final piece about being your partner's therapist and the whole rescuing, fixing dynamic. This obviously is a really challenging one because many of us, we were in these dynamics when we were young, right? So like for myself, I grew up essentially mothering my own mother. And so my pattern was to try to fix or save my partners. And so that's where my journey was, right? And so then, being in relationship with Ben, we both are sometimes overfunctioners, and so we've had to sort of work on that in our dynamic where one of us is trying to push each other into underfunctioning role in a way, in order to do that. And so it takes time and mindfulness to step out of that. But when we find ourselves wanting to save or fix, or we're wanting to overgive, A very simple practice that I have for this is really just noticing when you're about to give something. Tune into your body first. Am I giving this because I want to get something? Do I want approval? Do I want love? Do I want to feel important? And if the answer to that is yes, if you can be really honest with yourself, you don't have to share it with anyone. If the answer is yes, then just pause and just stop and redirect that energy toward yourself. It's a very simple practice. And I had to do this a lot when I was working through this pattern myself. So I would notice when I was about to start over giving, and then I would redirect, give something to myself. Okay. And of course, these are the somatic patterns that we're working with. So I think the person who sent me this said, I'm working on this with my somatic therapist already. What else do you have? And, you're doing it. And it's good that you're aware. So just keep practicing. And also notice too, sometimes we end up in dynamics with partners who they're in the role of underfunctioning. Their dynamic was to be in that sort of helpless role. And so there's work for them to do into taking care of themselves and being able to actually look for support outside of their partner. And sometimes that looks like learning how to be vulnerable in group settings, or Ben runs men's groups, things like that. Like, where can we put ourselves into situations? Maybe it's a support group of some kind, maybe it's like a codependency support group, something where we put ourselves in situations so that we can practice being in the presence of other people who aren't our partner and being vulnerable. Could you go let our dog in?
Yeah.
Our dog is staring out of the window at us. He's locked himself out. Okay, so remembering that we bring our family conditioning into relationship, and having the space to share with your partner what your childhood was like, right? What were the emotional themes? We talked about this a little bit before. So setting up a container, especially in those clearings, you don't always have to be clearing a conflict. Sometimes it could just be a sharing clearing. Like Ben and I, mostly we just do clearings that are just check-ins now. So we're not usually resolving a lot of conflict these days. And so we still take time to sit in front of each other, for a set amount of time. Now that we're practiced, we don't really use timers. If we were having a big fight or something, we would. But usually we just share until we feel like we've said what we want to say. And these containers can be really helpful too for talking about our histories with each other. Maybe you both set up at the table with some tea and a snack, and you tell each other a story about, your past, something about your childhood that will help your partner understand you more. And it doesn't always have to be heavy stuff. Even it can be, one of your best memories, some of the things that you loved the most about your childhood, or some of the things that maybe you didn't love, or the things that hurt you, or the things that you needed, right? These are all ways to get insights into who your partner is. And then those consistent themes are important, right? It's like, what did you feel consistently when you were growing up? Did you feel unheard, unsafe, frustrated, unimportant, pressured? I talk to people all the time who were always rushed out of the house, like I was always being rushed. I was always the last one out of the house. And so they're always kind of frantic. They're like, I'm coming, and that's a theme that we often carry into our family systems when we, recreate them later on. And so if we know, for example, that our partner felt really criticized, or felt really abandoned, or felt really unsafe when they were growing up, then we can be more mindful of trying to bring a sense of safety and respect and appreciation into the relationship. And that's not about saving or fixing. It's like, okay, well, you felt really criticized growing up, so how can I appreciate you more? So, in our relationship, we spend a lot of time thanking each other for things that both of us are responsible for doing. Like he loads the dishwasher and I say, thank you so much for doing that. And, I fold the laundry and he says, thank you for folding the laundry. Of course, it's our house. We fold the laundry, we empty the dishwasher. But there is this consistent environment of appreciation and praise that fuels a relationship. And that in itself is healing. That in itself will make you feel more alive, more seen, more important, more valued. And so we get out of this habit of like, well, you should have done that anyway, so why should I thank you, to like everything, like, I'm just so grateful for you as a partner and for the little things that you do and the way that you are. Right?
I say a bit. I see you guys covered the clearing method already.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you made a point about doing a clearing not just in conflict.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to practice doing clearings when things are just fine, and just getting in the practice of sharing our feelings and what we appreciate about each other, and getting used to that process, getting used to speaking to what's going on in our inner world. I'm actually a pretty emotional guy, but I am in get shit done mode like 99% of my life. And so when I'm in that mode, I'm actually not really stopping to say like, hey, I appreciate this thing that you did, or I really like this thing about you, or this was my favorite part of my day. Or I felt blank when you said this to me earlier today. I don't stop to do that. And I'm just always moving forward. It's just how I am. And I think a lot of people are like that. And scheduling these clearings and sitting down and doing this stuff gives us the space to practice doing that with each other. And these types of things require practice, just like yoga requires practice. Your body can kind of get crunchy if you don't stretch every once in a while, right? And that's what this is. And when we get in that, when we get in the flow of doing that, then when we sit down to clear a conflict, it's not such a foreign territory for us.
And it's not so triggering, because I think if we're always doing it when we're in conflict, then we're just sort of wiring in like, oh, this is what we do when like things are really tense. Like we actually look forward to clearings. Like we just did one a couple nights ago and it was just like really lovely. Like we just took a few minutes and we just appreciated each other and love bombed each other, told all the things I love about you. And I'm so grateful for our life. And that was it. And that's like, it's in a clearing format. We still follow the structure, but it's just pleasurable and nice. And so it is, you know, I like that you're saying, you know, it's like we're kind of building that muscle and we're getting used to it, feeling safe. And also we can practice really listening better when we're not activated. So it's like, if we're having a hard time with reactivity and defensiveness, the best way is actually to do clearings when there's nothing wrong. You know?
Yeah. If someone says, hey, like, let's talk, and your heart rate goes up because the only time that happens is when trouble is happening. You're not talking enough. You're not practicing talking enough. Right. So we try to say to each other, hey, let's talk more often. You know, and that sort of balances the nervous system and prepares you for those times where the talk is a little bit heavier.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. Okay. I just want to see how much I have left here. Okay, good. All right. So these are just things for you to consider. So we're not going to dive too much more into this because we sort of covered a lot of this already. But these are just some questions that I wanted you to ponder and to bring to yourself. And if you're in partnership, to your partner. But if you're not in relationship right now, it can be really helpful to think about, oh, how do I feel safe? And when do I feel safest? And do I know what makes me feel unsafe? And more than that, do I know what's happening in my body to indicate that I'm not feeling safe? Because oftentimes we don't realize that we're not feeling safe. Instead, we get very reactive or defensive or angry, or we're blaming. But actually what's happening is somewhere in our bodies, we're not feeling safe. And so if you can start to tune into, you know, what is it that helps me feel safe? You know, do I prefer, you know, a lot of time where we can spend a certain amount of time together each week, or, you know, are there certain ways that my partner responds to me that help me feel safe? Like, for example, you know, when we're putting our hands on each other, when we're talking, or making eye contact, or repeating things back, or asking questions, right? What does safety mean? Safety means that we're free to express our desires, needs, and differences without shame, judgment, or ridicule. Essentially, you are free to be your unique individual self in your partnership with your own opinion, even if it's different than your partner's. And you know that it's okay. And they know that it's okay to have those differences. And maybe you don't always agree, and maybe there's even conflict sometimes, but you're allowed to have those differences. And you feel safe expressing your desires, right? Now, the truth is that sometimes we don't know how to feel safe in partnership because we've literally never felt that in our lives. And so it doesn't matter what our partner does, we just don't feel safe. And that's why programs like this with the Embody Lab are so important, because we're actually learning how to help ourselves feel safe. So it's a two-way street. It's our responsibility, and it's the responsibility of each other in the partnership to co-create safety, right? So it's everybody's involved in that, right? And so I think that's really important. When we take safety seriously, it doesn't mean that we're coddling. It doesn't mean we're holding back our truth. It just simply means that we are honoring the gentleness, the vulnerability, the tenderness in the relationship. And then there's the empathizing and validating, which can help with the feeling safe. And this, again, goes back to the Imago principles for those of you who are really interested in Imago, and you're going to get that worksheet sent out to you. One of the main tools that they use in their Imago process is empathizing and validating. So when your partner shares something, you don't just say, oh, cool. You say, wow, like it sounds like you felt really scared and alone when you were a kid. And I understand that makes a lot of sense to me. I would have felt that way too if, people didn't listen to me when I fell off my bike and I was left alone in the street to cry, or whatever it is, So you empathize and you validate, you sort of reflect back what you heard, and you say that it makes sense to you. And these are little things that we do to cue to our partner, like, hey, I'm really here with you and I listen to you and I get you, right? That's an important feeling. So we're just recapping here what we talked about in the clearing method, which is listening without thinking about your response, tuning into your body and sensations while listening and holding space so you can stay in your body. So this has been the recurring theme of this whole workshop, right? Is how do we stay centered in ourselves, stay true to ourselves while also being in partnership, having that anchored relationship to you and also being in relationship with your partner without giving up yourself in the process. So if we can't tolerate a partner because they're feeling something really intense, it's usually because we're enmeshed with them, right? Or we haven't built the resilience in our nervous systems yet to be able to be with big sensations or big feelings. We get overwhelmed. So if we can't be with that in ourselves, we can't be with that in others. And so if that's where we're at now, there's no judgment, there's no shame. It's really about knowing that, like, oh, I actually don't have the capacity to give a lot right now. And I can tell my friends that. I have a friend she's been in somatic therapy for the last year and a half, and she just says, I have nothing to give right now. I can't hold space for anyone right now. And, I just want to let you know that, like, can we still be in relationship if you're not able to like bring big things to me? And I say, of course, I have other friends who I can share with, and that's okay with me. Right. In a romantic partnership, things are a little bit different because we do require presence and attentiveness from our partners, and we are required to show up a bit. But how much we can show up depends on how much capacity we have. And so we're always working on building that for ourselves, while also knowing that it's okay to not bring everything to your partner, and they shouldn't be bringing everything to you. Right? Like when Ben and I have stuff going on in our lives, we know what's going on for each other, but also, we both have strong connections with others. So if something happens, and last year there was like a little bit of a rupture in our family, and I'm not going to go into what that was, but there's something happened and for both of us, and we both felt kind of hurt about it. And both of us relied on other friends, as we supported each other through it. With our family, we also called our friends, and I had friends that I talked to, he had friends that he talked to. And so there's sort of this concept in relationship of creating this like little bubble of two, where you just sort of like go into your own world, and like everything is just secretive and nobody else can understand you and nobody else knows your world. And that's where this codependence can kind of build. And also, we lose village, we lose community.
The cult of two.
Yeah.
It's been called.
Yeah. And so, we make a practice of really building community in our partnership. And so really weaving people into our world, and so I intentionally don't just go to him with everything. I intentionally, even it's most natural for me to go to him because he's one of my best friends and we tell each other everything. But I will consciously go, is this an opportunity for me to deepen any other relationships? And so I'll call one of my girlfriends or somebody else in my life too, to let them in on something. And so thinking about, do you have one or two people in your life outside of a relationship that you can continue to cultivate deep friendship with? Community is very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the number one recommendations I make for men who want to be stronger or show up better for their partner in relationship is to have a circle of men that they can sit with and talk about their lives, talk about their relationship, not bring every little thing to their partner to process. For me, that's not fair to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I also need other brains to share what's going on and bounce my ideas off of, and to have other people challenge me on maybe how I'm showing up or how I'm looking at things. And I can go and get my energy right with a group of people and then come back to you and show up in a way where we can actually process and get somewhere. Whereas I can get stuck in my defensiveness, or I can get stuck in my way of seeing things with you. So yeah, that's the number one recommendation I make for men is to, if you don't have a best friend or a circle, like what I call a band of brothers, you need to cultivate that. You need to find that.
Yeah, it's important to find spaces where we can share. But especially like there's like a lot of research now that men specifically don't have best friends and they don't have spaces anymore where they share. And there's like, many of us, we've been exploring this in this program too, right? With these different dynamics that happen. And there is sort of this like interesting culture shift right now where we're all sort of expanding our capacity to be vulnerable and to have emotions. And so I think it's important that we find spaces, with people who resonate with where we're at, so finding groups for whatever you resonate with, whether that's a men's group or they have a band of brothers, which is it called the Sacred Band? It's
in the Arc of Brotherhood.
In the Arc of Brotherhood, it's just for gay men who circle in community. There's trans spaces or women's groups or whatever it is, where you find spaces where you can share with community, and that's not just your partner. And really, really important. That's like something you can cultivate all the time. And if you're single, even better time, to do that too, start building that for yourself, because we are relational beings. So if you're on your own, you still really need those people in your life who can be there for you. And we're not meant to do this alone. So this is just a cute little thing that we did when we were in our power struggle phase many years ago, when we were living in a tiny little apartment. And, we were conflicting about all sorts of stuff all the time.
Yeah, everything.
It was ridiculous, really, but we're not there anymore. But what we did to sort of, lift the energy a bit and remind each other like, hey, this is who you're really in relationship with. We put photos of each other as children on the fridge, or you can put them in your bathroom. It's a lovely thing for you to do for yourself, to have a photo of your inner child when you were little. And also if you're in partnership, for you to have of your partner too. And what we found is like, if we were in conflict and then we go open the fridge and I see little Ben and he sees little Celina, there's just a softening that happens. But also with ourselves, right? Having a photo of ourselves as a child and really having that tenderness toward ourselves. So it's just a cute little thing that I like to suggest to people. So conflict isn't inherently bad. It's how we react or respond that makes the difference, right? So we're talking about repairing, showing up in a healthy way. We're focusing on being regulated and being in our bodies so that we're not hurting each other, hurting each other's feelings and being volatile or yelling or things like that. So we're setting the tone. So through all of the things that we've covered already, those are the things that we can do foundationally to make sure that when conflict happens, it doesn't escalate to a point where it's, we're creating long-term damage, right? And so we've covered a lot of that already.
Mhm.
And then the repair is very important. Like, can you say, I'm sorry, or can you speak up when your feelings are hurt? And this is something we had to practice, right? Saying, ouch, that hurt my feelings is one of the hardest things to do in relationship. It actually is very difficult for many of us. Some of us, maybe you're like, that's easy for me. A lot of us find it really tough.
Mhm.
It's actually incredibly vulnerable to admit that you've been hurt.
Yeah, because it actually opens you to being stomped on more.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you're on the schoolyard and some kid does something that hurts you, and then you say, ow, that hurt, you're open to even more criticism. You could just get pointed at and laughed at. Right. And that's happened to all of us at some point in our lives. And that's what comes up when we're hurt in relationship. We're faced with that same decision. Like, do I expose my heart here and give this person the opportunity to hurt me further, or do I protect myself? And I certainly have felt that a lot in this relationship and had to sort of make that leap.
And if we're in, we've gone through what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship versus we're in a relationship where it's not safe. And we should be practicing this work in a relationship that's safe with there's willing partners. If you're really with a partner who wants to love you better, who wants to show up for you, I can promise that when you say, ouch, that hurt, truly vulnerably, instead of like hurling a reaction, which is really hard to do in the moment, there will be a softening. There's never been a time where either of us have been actually deeply hurt where we just don't care. Because it sort of breaks the pattern. Because what we're so used to doing is just getting defensive and reacting, right? So when you just stop for a minute and you just show that it hurt, you let your partner in, there's sort of like a pattern interrupt. We bring the energy down by doing that. And we create space for healing, right? And so the thing to remember too is that just because your feelings were hurt doesn't mean that your partner did something wrong intentionally, but intention versus impact is important. A lot of people will say, well, it's not my problem because that wasn't my intention. That was not what I was trying to do. So, it's not my problem. If there's some way of me showing up or communicating that's hurting my partner, even if I'm not intending to, if he consistently tells me that it's hurting him, then if I want to be a good partner, then I'm going to shift the way that I'm showing up. Not because he's forcing me to change, not because he's controlling me, but because that's what we do when we want to show up healthy in partnership. Right? And it did take us a while to figure that out too, because we do have these patterns of resisting control, and rightfully so, nobody wants to be controlled. But there is this deeper place that we get to when we really enter a space of conscious relationship where we want to show up for our partners. Like, we just want to love each other. And like, that needs to be the anchor of your relationship. That needs to be the center of it. Like, how do we nourish this?
Yeah. On my end, I'm the one who hurts. I hurt Celina more than she hurts me, for sure.
I'm a sensitivo.
I'm a bit of a bull. And early in our relationship, I would hurt her and she would share that with me, and I would actually get defensive because it triggered shame in me. I felt bad for hurting her. And as a recovering nice guy, I over-identify with the feelings of women. And I really identify with being a good partner. I want to be a good man. The hero is a very strong archetype in me. And when I perceive that I'm failing, I get a lot of shame and I get really defensive. And so there were times where Celina would be crying and would be hurt sharing with me, and I would be defensive with her. And by going through a number of those with her and debriefing them afterwards and doing conscious relationship work, I realized that one of the keys to all of this for me was going to be to open when she was showing me her heart, and to picture her inner child, look in her eyes and see that photo on the fridge, which I can still see that photo of you like smothering that cat, just like beaming smile, you're like 5 years old.
Yeah.
And seeing that in you when you're sitting there in front of me with your eyes watering and softening my own defenses and getting out of my own defensive process, like I'm failing, and see your heart and empathize with you for a moment. What's it like to be her? And so we were both working in those moments. Celina was working on bringing her vulnerability to me yet again. And I was working on opening.
Which was hard for both of us. It's not my MO. Like I used to be very like protected and guarded, because in my childhood history, like I essentially grew up living on the streets, so it was like you don't show vulnerability at all. So for me, that was like really hard. And then if I'd get rejected, it was even harder to continue to bring it. But we knew we were committed. We knew we were willing. We just weren't doing a very good job, but the willingness was there, right?
Inch by inch. I think we had some good breakthroughs where Celina showed me vulnerability. And then I really just tried to drop my armor, open my heart, and then tune into her vulnerability and connect with that. Yeah. And those were the times where we made a significant leap, and you string a bunch of those together and you start to break a pattern. Yeah. So that's how it worked.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, for those of us who are the ones bringing vulnerability, something that I had to really look at in myself was when I was saying that I was being vulnerable, but I was actually still being quite guarded and defensive and angry, because it's really, really scary, based on whatever our history is. Maybe it just does not feel natural to show our hearts. Right. And so there's a lot of times where he was shutting down and I was feeling, quite sorry for myself. But really, if I were to replay it in my mind afterwards, I could really see that I wasn't, I was pushing him away too. Not always, but a lot of times. And so there's this mutual exploration when we're in conflict that sometimes it just doesn't go well. And after, we have to look at, okay, these are the things that I did to sort of rupture the safety. And these are the things that I did to sort of rupture the safety. And here's how I want to show. So it's this mutual dance of slowly building so that you know how to create it together. And then eventually it just becomes second nature. And then, over time, the goal is that really these types of like, I can't remember the last time we had a conflict where either of us felt that worked up, because we've worked so hard and for so long at repair and at noticing safety and noticing how our partner feels safe and respected. That doesn't happen anymore, but it takes so much effort. And there are so many times along the way where you wonder if things are ever going to shift. Right. And so we just have to really stay in the game. And that's why I say, safety and willingness, like, is there willingness from both of you? Do you both really want it? Because if you both really want it, it will shift. It just won't happen overnight. And it's not going to happen after 3 clearings, right? Or if 10 clearings even, it's going to take time. Reducing negativity and learning to see your partner in their highest light. So what we just talked about here is very much related. Seeing yourself and your partner. What we tend to do when we're in conflict or when we are, turned off by something that our partner did is we really over focus on them and their behavior, what they're doing, or that trait we don't like. And one of the tools, this is a sentence stem, is something I see in you that I see in me. As we used to do this in our tantra groups all the time. We'd walk around the room to just random people and we'd look at them and say, something I see in you that I see in me is. And sometimes you would just be making things up because you don't really know the person. So then you see how your mind can create stories about who you think a person is. But when we're in partnership, there are often things that our partner will do that, bug us in some way of them responding or reacting. And one of the ways we can soften in the moment instead of, criticizing or getting reactive is just to see if you recognize any of that in yourself. Do you see that reaction? Do you see that feeling? Do you see that way of being, even 1% in yourself? And then we go back to the praise and the appreciation, right? Even for the little things, saying thank you. And before making a judgment or a criticism, you want to think about how it would feel to receive that And then sometimes when we're criticizing or judging, what we're actually looking for is something. We want something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, and this again, this is a lifelong practice. This isn't something that you just perfect. Like, I'm still working on this as well. Is when there's a judgment or a criticism or a complaint, there's actually a need or a desire behind that. Can you contact what that is for you? And can you pause for a moment and think, okay, well, actually, what I really want is this. Can I ask for what I want instead of, the comfortable pattern of just blaming my partner or complaining that they don't ever do anything right or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then just remembering there's no perfect partner. There's no perfect relationship. It's not a thing. And we're never going to get there because that doesn't exist. And so it's sort of this idea where we're like out there looking for someone who meets all of our needs and checks all of our boxes. But eventually we realize there's always some element, I like to look at the elements of earth, like we have earth, fire, air, water, right? And some of us are more one element than the other. And there's always just different combinations of elements that make up our being. And then same with our partner. And there's always going to be some element that is maybe like a little bit less. There's a little less of that in the relationship, right? There's always something that you could want more of, or that you could want to change, or that you could want to perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get really deep into relationship, like we've been in a relationship for 20 years, sometimes we get bored and we think, oh, well, I'll just find somebody new who excites me. And you will think that that person is going to be all of those things. But eventually, if we get deep enough into relationship with them, we see that there's always something that's not perfect. And so it's not so much about finding the perfect partner, but finding the perfect partner for you, the person you really want to do the work with. And then just accepting, my partner is not here to meet every single one of my needs. I can meet some of those needs in community. I meet some of those needs for myself. I meet some of those needs in nature. We can't always be attuned. And this is the same with parenting. I think it's Gordon Neufeld. He talks about, I believe it's Gordon Neufeld, maybe it's Stan Tatkin. They talk about in attachment that it's only like 30 or 40% of the time, really, that we're in sync with our baby and their needs. And that's actually enough to create secure attachment. We're responding to their cues that much. The idea that we could always be in sync and attuned and on the same vibe with our partner, totally unrealistic. It's just, if we're both being true to ourselves and being authentic, we're going to have different experiences. We're going to be in different places. We're going to have different energetic needs and wants. And so if we can learn how to appreciate that and let ourselves live life together, but being ourselves and making space for the differences, and support our partner in, creating a vibrant life for themselves that's not just about us, mm-hmm. and vice versa, then it just creates this paradise at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can I speak to this negativity piece? So the best way to do that is to learn how to speak to your own needs and to listen to the needs of your partner. I think the default that happens in relationship when we're not trained how to ask for what we want and how to have clearings like we're talking about here is we're always sort of, moving around, living our lives together and not often really speaking to what we want. Mm-hmm. And so there's resentments, there's judgments, and they just sort of permeate the space. They float on the surface. And it's really easy to throw a little complaint in here, a little judgment here, a little nitpick there. And we do that to each other all the time. It becomes this sort of thing that's everywhere in the relationship all the time. So instead of sitting down and having these clearings where we get real about, hey, this is something that I need. This is something that hurt my feelings. This is something I want more of in our relationship. I want less of this. All of those desires and feelings, they just kind of like pop up every once in a while in these little comments. And what Harville and Helen Hendricks realized is the brain can default to negativity in relationship like this. And you can end up with 90 to 95% of your conversation having some form of negativity or judgment in it. And that's toxic to relationship. And so their practice is cut the negativity, however you have to do that. Like really learning like what your partner perceives as negative and what you perceive as negative, and cut that out of your daily life, and then learn how to sit down and speak to, I want this, I want that, I want less of this. Here's something that I like. Here's something that I don't like, something that hurt my feelings. Here's what I want more of in my relationship, and clearing that stuff out so that we can live a more harmonious way with each other. And it's this repatterning, this different practice that we all need to sort of figure out together. Yeah. So they have this thing called the no negativity challenge, and they give you a little calendar with little smiley faces if you get through a day where you weren't negative with each other. And it's a great practice. If you combine that with the clearing method, you are going to change how your relationship is.
Yeah. That's a really cute one. Okay. So we're going to get through these two, and then we're going to open up for some questions. I'm going to turn the chat back on in about 3 minutes here, and then we'll get to your questions for about 20 minutes. Okay. So secrets to creating an equal partnership where you're both free to be yourselves and you never have to hold back your truth to protect the other person. Right. So we've sort of gone through all of this. This is a bit of a recap, but we want to get back to this idea of bringing our truth and being honest without being hurtful. And so many of us have been conditioned, especially those of us who identify with that rescuer pattern. This is a big practice for you, so you can write this one down. If you identify as, therapizing or psychoanalyzing or parentifying your partner, then one of your greatest challenges is to bring your truth, your needs, your fears, your desires to the relationship, to take up some space there. And so what does that really mean? Right? What does honesty really look like? A lot of people hear radical honesty or things like, oh, you just be totally truthful, as like just saying everything you think. We think a lot of things throughout the day. That doesn't mean that you have to share it all. We're talking about the things that could get in the way of you being connected to your partner. So if there's anything that could prevent you from feeling complete at the end of the night, if you could lay down with your partner and not feel totally connected, there's something in the way that needs to be shared. And that's how you know. Mm-hmm. And the final piece that we're going to touch on here before we open up for questions is creating a relationship agreement and coming back to it regularly. This is something that Ben and I have done. We probably haven't done this in a while now. And we renewed our vows last year, and this was a little bit of our relationship agreement. So we go through our vows, which also include what we called like shadow vows or like ownership vows, where not only do we create like, here's all of the ways that I'm going to show up powerfully, but here's some of the things that I own for some of the ways that I don't show up powerfully that I'm going to be working on. And so, every year we go through those and say, oh, actually we kind of grade ourselves. It's like, oh, I think I actually really improved this. I actually think I can just take this off the list. I don't need to own this anymore. Like this is kind of, this pattern's died for me. Or, this is something I actually really want to bring to our relationship this year, and so one of the things for me was deeper ancestral reverence and ritual. I wanted to bring that. And so in our last anniversary, we went and we did a ritual, and we did a prayer at the river, and we made an offering. And I said, this is something that I want to infuse back into our connection and into our family. And so we can sort of sit and talk about, what are the things that we want to give? What do we want to receive? What are our strengths? And how can we elevate that? How do we want to resolve conflict? And what are we going to need? What are we going to do if we want to, take a break? Like I told you about how when Ben and I used to conflict and he needed to go to the gym, what was the agreement? That he would tell me he was going to the gym and when he'd be back, right? How many dates a month are you going to go on? What's your ideal date? Like, how do you each feel loved and appreciated? For some of us, there's very specific things. For some of us, there's not. I'm like a big morning. I love walks and breakfast. It's like my favorite thing to do. One of the things, and Ben kind of likes to wake up and get going. I like to really slowly start the day. So one of the things he does to show me love is once in a while, he'll just have a slow morning with me. Mm-hmm. Right. So you can work these things into your relationship agreements. And I'm going to touch on the bottom here, which you'll see that the differences are often untapped power team waiting to happen. We have the dreamer, engineer, the spender, saver. And I go into this a lot deeper in other programs that we created, but I want to touch on it because this will help you with your relationship agreements. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and those are part of who we are. And there's nothing that we need to change about that. If we're in partnership with someone who has opposite qualities to us, in the beginning, our tendency is going to be to judge that and to try to change it, make them more like us. But what you can realize as you progress is that if you're both willing to appreciate those differences and not see them as a threat, then you can create a power team. Because if you look at a company, for example, right? If you you don't hire, two for the same leadership role. There's always different, even on this call, we have someone who's here to support emotionally. We have someone who's here to moderate. We have someone who's here to support with tech. We don't need 3 of all of those things. We need, one person to hold this space, one person to hold that space. And so we see that as totally normal. But then we go into a romantic relationship and then we want to make the person just like us. We think they should be in our role. And we have to wonder why that is, right? And so when we're in relationship, then we can say, oh, you're actually different from me. So in our dynamic, I'm the dreamer, he's the engineer. I'm big vision. I'm always having ideas and things that I want to create. And then he's always thinking about how it will or will not work. And it's not a negative thing, but I used to perceive it as that. Well, why are you telling me all the things about it that's not going to work? Like, just dream with me. You're pooping on my dreams.
Like I'm the limiter, right? You're limiting me.
But then I realized, wow, this guy he really understands things in a way that I don't. He makes my dreams come true a lot. Like we live on 10 acres and I have all of these ideas. And now, he says, this is all the reasons that it won't work. And I realize he's not trying to stop the thing from happening. He's going through all of the things that won't work so he can figure out how it will. That's how the engineer's brain works. So instead of, stopping that, we think, oh, wow, what a great team, and so we can co-create together. So he'll often he'll be down on the land and he'll call me and he'll say, how do you want this to look? What's your vision? And then I'll share and then he'll make it happen. And this is something that couples get into conflict a lot about, because they're not elevating each other's differences. And it's the same with the spender and the saver. So if you're managing finances together, whoever's the spender, oftentimes spenders are more vision creative. And then the savers are a little bit more engineer, kind of here's how things work, here's structure, and here's a little bit more rule oriented, that kind of thing. And so how can you create a team together? How can you work together? And you'll actually bring each other into balance. So our financial relationship has evolved to the point where, both of us have become more abundant. I've become a little bit more, I guess you would say a little bit more structured, a little bit more conservative, more organized. He's focused, his abundance mentality is expanded because we've grown. And so when you look at your partner's differences and you can talk about them, you can weave that into your relationship agreement. Here's how we're going to support each other in growing. And here, maybe we're going to have a talk about money every month and we're going to, just share, and then we're going to set goals together, and these are the kinds of things that over time you have a power team instead of a bunch of differences that create conflict. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Let's see. Okay, so let's open up here. We've just got 15 minutes here, so we're going to do questions. So I see Imago, it's Imago, it's IMAGO, and you're going to get an email. They're going to send you out the slides for this whole workshop after. And yes, Gordon Neufeld and Stan Tatkin are who I was referencing. Let's see here.
Imago is a word that they invented. Harville and Helen, they invented that. It's a synthesis of the word image and something else. And it's an image in your mind. Basically, we form an image in our mind that resembles a caregiver that we had, that we have unresolved things with. And we've got that sort of empty image in our unconscious. We walk around looking for that in relationships. And that's what pops up a lot of the time. It's our imago showing up.
Okay, here's a good question. Do you have any advice for creating safety when my inner child needs total commitment, guarantee of marriage, etc., and is scared of abandonment? How to be okay with uncertainty and avoid self-sabotaging behavior. He is willing and interested in doing the work. Yeah. So I'm gonna answer your questions a little bit more briefly, just so that I can get to lots of them. But this one, I just want to say, it's good of you to recognize that. And one thing that I might suggest is to reframe that you absolutely need that thing, to that, like, the part of you that is really scared feels like you need that thing. And the reason that I say that is because sometimes our needs are actually our fears, right? There's difference between something that we really need and that's something that is rooted in fear. The truth is that yes, you can require total commitment from your partner, but can you have a guarantee of marriage? And can you even guarantee that it's going to work out? No. And the truth is, and this isn't to scare you, it's just that you don't actually get to decide how long this partnership is going to last. I don't know how long we're going to live. We just don't know. So every day we have to cherish and just be total with each other, because we can be in the happiest relationship of our lives and everything can be perfect and it can still end. And that's really hard to grapple with, but it's also that truth that can create this beautiful presence each day in relationship. Right. And so if we can sort of shift out of this, like, I need certainty, to, well, there's actually no certainty there. It just really, that's just not something that we come onto this planet with, unfortunately. It just, there isn't any. The only thing that's certain is there's no certainty. Right. So if we can start to work with that spiritual concept a little bit and accept it. And also, we need commitment. So what are the agreements that we're going to make around that? And then we can soothe that inner child that's terrified of being abandoned. And we work on those self-soothing practices with ourselves and then with our partner.
The inner child wants to feel safe right now, here and now, right? And that desire can show up in the mind as like, hey, I want total predictability and I want to know that, like, I'm never going to be alone again. But that can't be given, right? And so as the partner who's being asked to give these things, I know that I can't give most of that, but what I can give is emotional safety and total commitment to her here right now. Emotional safety and, like, hey, I'm here with you 100%. Right? And I can practice that day by day, and you can practice receiving that day by day and soothing that inner child in the process. And really this is what a realistic way of parenting is, saying, hey, we don't know what the future holds, but I'm here with you right now. Yeah. And I'm not going anywhere. Yeah. Right.
And saying that to yourself too. There's this reparenting of, oh my goodness, like, you're feeling so scared and you just don't want to be abandoned. And so, you want your partner to just tell you that everything's going to be okay. And that makes so much sense to me, and it's going to be okay, sweetie. Like, I'm here with you. Talk to yourself that way, right? Because when we are terrified to be abandoned, like you said, you mentioned the self-sabotage behavior. This is one of the things we don't talk a lot about, which is, often a result of anxiety or fear of being abandoned, is we will unconsciously push and test. We'll try to test the relationship until it breaks. And so, and this is where bringing ritual in, bringing these, especially in relationships where there's this need for attention or there's this need for love. One partner might end up feeling like they are the one who's responsible for giving all of that, and they might forget their needs a little bit. And the other person might also sort of become over hyper focused on their experience because it's so much sensation. And so bringing these appreciation practices in, so setting up a clearing every single week where you just appreciate each other, or having a practice where before bed every night you say 3 things that you appreciate about each other every single night. These little things that build safety and appreciation, where you feel loved, right? And you're both getting energy. Because what can happen in this pattern is one person sort of begins to like hyper focus on their experience, and then there's an imbalance. So create an appreciation practice, and then just keep showing up, do these clearings, create your relationship agreements. That's doing the work. You guys are doing the work. So yeah. Okay, so we've got 7 minutes left. Would reflecting and empathizing your partner's guilty feeling or shame caused by hearing or seeing the pain he caused you help him reduce his defensiveness? If they say that that's what they're feeling. So if your partner shares a feeling and you empathize and reflect back, then yes. If you're assuming you know what your partner is feeling, then maybe not.
Yeah.
So asking.
We've done that. I've said, I feel like I'm a failure right now in supporting you because I did my best. And here you are sitting in front of me crying about, how I showed up or what I said. And I feel shitty. I feel sad, and she would reflect that back to me. And those are moments where we're sort of opening each of us. Yeah.
Just don't assume what your partner's feeling. So it's always good to ask, what are you feeling right now?
This is like the number one question ever. How and when to determine a relationship is not worth pursuing. It's a very hard question.
I know, it's such a hard question because it's like, there are a million questions we would have to ask in order to know, where this relationship is at. But again, I would say it always comes down to a few things again, right? And I'm going to send you these slides too, but it's willingness. Are you both willing? Have you both expressly said, hey, I'm willing to do the work in this relationship? Hey, I actually have the intention of being with you. I want to be here with you. I care. And like, is the relationship safe, on all levels? And not emotionally safe? Yes. But it's not all, like, even in our relationship, there's been moments of emotional rupture where you have to repair. Like, there's no perfection, but I'm talking about like, it's not an abusive container, right?
Yeah, if we put those factors into an AI machine and then just got like a billion relationships worth of data, we could solve relationships and we could be millionaires. I wish it was really easy to answer that question.
Yeah, it's such a tough one.
We all ask that question in all of our relationships, right?
Yeah. But the other thing to ask yourself amongst all of those 3 things that I mentioned is, what are you pursuing this person from? What energy are you pursuing from, and why? What do you want from them? Like, are you pursuing this person simply because they're avoidant and they're making you chase? Are you pursuing this person because you feel some sort of sexual attraction and there's just like an energy in your body? Or are you pursuing this person because you've both really mutually shown up to the container with a willingness and you both actually want it? So it's always important to actually check in with yourself. Like, why do I want this person? What is it that I love so much about our dynamic? What is it that I love so much about our relationship? What is it that I'm fighting for? Okay. And again, knowing your core values and doing that work will help you come back to that as well. Okay, we probably have room for one more here.
19 more messages, so we're going till 1:30.
Yeah. So I think, I just want to say too, I know I can get this chat. I can download these questions. So if you guys are not following both of us on Instagram, we will do our best. We will never share your name. Of course, this will all be anonymous, but whatever questions don't get answered today, we'll do our best over the next few months to take some of these questions and create responses or videos or something. And I also have a YouTube channel where I do short 10-15 minute videos. So if you don't get your question answered, then check out some of our channels to see if we can address them. I think I'll try to do this one really quickly, and then I'll try to do this one, I think. When do you know you're ready to date? Is there a right time? Everybody always asks this. And one of the things that I would say is you're never going to be perfectly ready. There's a lot of us that want to be like perfectly healed before we go into relationship. But the truth is that once we get into relationship, then the deeper work begins. Because even those things where we felt like we were secure, we had it all figured out, it'll often reemerge in a new way once we're in relationship, because a lot of these patterns are relationally activated. When you know you're not ready to date, if you're feeling desperate, like if you're desperate for a partner, if you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot be alone, I hate this, like I need somebody, that's not a good time to go out and find a partner, because you're not in your center, you're not qualifying at all. You're just like, you're looking for somebody to fix the feeling that you're having. And so that's one thing that I would say, if you just got out of a breakup, you're feeling like the weight of your trauma. Like when I went through my divorce, however many years ago it was, and I just had all of my wounds ripped open, and I was just felt terrible about myself. My self-esteem was plummeted. I just didn't feel good. I didn't date at all, not even once, because I knew that I just couldn't show up powerfully. I had no confidence and I wasn't in my center. Right. And so it's for you to determine if you feel confident and you feel like you know who you are and what you want a little bit, then, get out there, like have experiences, be social, date people. If you like dating, I'm a hermit. So I never really, this is the first guy I went on a date with, and now we're married.
Yeah.
After, so
I had to get in there. I had to wait for the right opportunity for the universe to bump us into each other.
Yeah. But it's just, there's no perfection. So if you feel ready and you aren't desperate to have somebody, you feel like I can be alone, I can have a meal on my own, or I can spend time on my own and I'm okay, then, then you're ready. And there's always going to be more work to do.
Do you have something to offer? Are you a pillar unto yourself? Not a closed book, but like, do you feel like you're standing on your own 2 feet? I'd love to finish with the Khalil Gibran poem about this.
Oh, that's a good idea.
At the end.
Do you want me to pull it up?
One of my favorites. I've got it on my phone. So
okay.
I'll just read it at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't you read it now? Because we're at the end.
Oh, geez.
So I'll let you pull that up. And thank you everyone for your presence today. To the couples that showed up together, deep bows to you. This work is not always easy. And I just really acknowledge you for showing up together. And for every single person who came, with the intentions that you shared. It's been really beautiful to witness you all and to share this time. All right,
good.
Great.
Let's keep
okay,
going then.
So then you can do that after?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see here. What are the ones I want to get to?
Ayako, do we answer Ayako's question? People have X3'd it. There's like multiple.
Oh, really? Where is it?
It's up. It's up above this.
Yeah, that was the one about when do we end the relationship?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
When do you end the relationship?
I know, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I used to have a teacher who said, if it's been really shitty for 6 months and there's no willingness, then that's time to end it. And I was like, okay, well, at least you have an answer. But you know what? The ultimate truth is like, some of us spend 5 years in a relationship or 10 years in a relationship that we actually never really even felt that into, but for something kept us there. And then when we look back, if we really do our work around it, there's so much that we can learn on the other side of it. And so it's never a waste. So I don't really like even looking at those histories and those relationships as like, oh, well, I failed and I wasted all of my time. Did you? Because if you're learning something now, then that was likely part of the medicine that you needed. Sometimes we go into these things and we don't even know why we're going into them or why we stayed for so long when we were really not into it. But then we realized that there was a lot for us to work out through that relationship and through that relationship ending that we wouldn't have gotten if we had, left early or, whatever. So it's important to just really honor the experience.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I'd like to know more about how to work with resentment in relationships. Do you have a program within your offerings that goes in depth on how to work toward resentment? Yeah, we actually have a 6-week program called Creating Conscious Love for Couples. that specifically goes through all of the tools that we have. We're eventually going to add some more stuff to it.
There's not a lot of like specific stuff about resentment in there. There is a practice around, clearing what's there for us. Yeah.
Well, I mean, resentment is the result of not clearing. Resentment happens inevitably when you don't bring your truth, or you don't speak to things in the moment, or at least within the time period that they happened. That's why we encourage couples to every week sit down and clear anything that might have hurt your feelings, anything that made you angry, anything that you want to shift, because then you can't build resentment. And so, we have practices in the program for that, but we also have some practices on exploring your childhood. And sometimes we are resentful toward our partner, or we're angry at our partner for things that actually happened to us in the past that don't even have anything to do with our partner. And so we created some dialogue around that.
Yeah. And a simple one would be like, I'm angry at you because, and this reminds me of blank from my past, and maybe beyond that, what's under my anger is, right? That's a good way to dig into resentment.
At what point were you able to relax and trust in relationship, having experienced so much trauma? Well, for myself, I think I had to do a lot of work prior to meeting Ben, do a lot of healing work on myself to actually be open to see how my defenses and my avoidance and my suppressing of my own experience were contributing to me not having healthy relationships. Regardless of the fact that I actually was on the receiving end of a lot of betrayal, when I really went into my own healing work, I wasn't focused on, why did they do that or what's wrong with that person? It was, what am I creating in my own patterns by not actually being true to myself, by avoiding connection, by avoiding intimacy, by being so guarded, by not acknowledging my own heart, my own history. And so sort of preparing ourselves by doing that inner work. And then also, it's just a lifelong practice. I think there's no point where like, it's just clicks. It's just this lifelong, like every day, like we said, we're showing up every day, minute by minute, bringing more love into the partnership.
Yeah.
And like, can we prioritize peace and harmony? And when we have extra energy, can we put that toward creating something beautiful instead of putting it toward conflict and chaos? And as we do that more and more, we start to relax, we start to trust, and it's this co-creative process.
It's a process. It's a journey. I would say that like, I really noticed a shift in you about a year after we got married. So like, it's a long journey. It's a really long journey, and it's still happening. We're still growing in that direction. So the main thing I would say to you, Karen, is the journey may never be over, but keep practicing and moving in the right direction.
And somatic experiencing, again, if I can refer you to one tool with a practitioner that I find really, really helps when there is a lot of trauma, with really helping the nervous system relax and trust and release some of that fear, it would be that. For clearing, does it have to be equal time for each partner? Yes. Yeah.
Yes, in the beginning, for sure.
Yeah.
Once you're experienced, you can bring in your own alterations. A lot of times now, like Celina often has more to say than I do, and we accept that. And I like it that way. I like listening to her more than I like just blabbing about my own stuff. My mind is more empty than hers. I'll just, there's more numbers in there, I would say, than what's in your mind.
Yeah.
But I mean, that works for us.
What we're doing mostly now is we do this we kind of like empty the bucket. That's a different practice, but it's basically the same, where you don't have anything that you really need to clear. So what we usually are doing is we're like hey, this is what's going on in my life right now. Here's what I've been feeling, or here's something I'm working with, or here's some spiritual thing that I'm, working through on my own. And then here's all the things that I love about our life these days. Here's something that I want to bring in more. And so when we're emptying the bucket and there's not an emotional charge, then yeah, usually there's like a talker and a listener and someone who has more to say. That's fine. But when you're doing a clearing, especially in the beginning, and there's conflict, equal time. Because you want to just create a balance on the scales. You don't want to create this like, one of us is more important or my feelings are more important than yours. You really want to practice maturity and equality. Yeah. So it just depends on what you're using it for. Let's see. If a partner can't recognize their lane and thus can't take responsibility for their behavior, can't see issues, is there any way to pop through the denial system? Do you want me to start with that?
Yeah.
This is one that we get all of the time, obviously, because we all want to know, like, how do I wake my partner up and how do I fix them? And how do I make them see how they're responsible? And unfortunately, the answer is you can't. Like I said in the beginning, if we are dealing with somebody who's very defensive, one of the ways that we can potentially open them or help them soften is by practicing vulnerability or being really responsible for our own minds and our own emotions. So we can lead by example, but we can only do that for so long. If we're doing that consistently over and over and over, and our partner is never contributing, there's never a reciprocity, then of course, eventually that fizzles out. And then the relationship just it can't thrive. It can't grow, right? It'll just, eventually the energy will die. Or you'll just stay locked in that forever. And then there's not really much of a partnership going on. And so I always say, if you're leading by example and you're doing your best and you're being vulnerable as much as you can, they're either going to take the cue and they're going to contribute and they're going to show up, or they're not. But you can only do you. You cannot fix them. You can't do anything really except for, show up in your highest self. And then hopefully they want to reciprocate that.
Something that works for me is that when I'm not hearing Celina's concern, or I'm not making a shift in how I'm showing up or how I'm talking to her or how I'm dealing with whatever it is, there's usually a trigger, like how we schedule the calendar, or how we're dealing with money, or how I'm managing my schedule, or whatever it is, brings up a bigger issue, or how I, speak to her. She might, tell me at some point, like, hey, this is a problem for me, like how this is going down, or how you're bringing this to me, or how you're talking to me. And I, that penetrates some level, one layer of the onion, but maybe I don't fully get it. And she can tell I don't fully get it. And she doesn't feel heard. And she has to bring it up again. Something that's helpful for me is that she's persistent and she keeps bringing it up until she feels heard. And sometimes she has to get a little intense with me about it. And we have to go for a walk and, really get energized with each other about it. And until I sort of match her and go like, okay, like I'm really getting that this is a problem. Like, yeah, we've got to figure this out. I encourage that more than I encourage someone to try and then just let go, because having some energy in the relationship is a good thing. Yeah. The dead zone is a place where relationships go to die. And the dead zone is where both people are just coping. And they're just like, okay, I'm never going to get through to this person. So I'm just going to give up. I'm not going to try to share my desires, my needs, or my feelings with this other person because they didn't hear me last time. And so I'm just going to give up. That's where relationships go to die. And so my message there is just like, don't give up. You're not ever going to get all of your needs met in relationship, because we're, by virtue of being two separate people. But if something's a big deal for you, and if something's a big deal for you, don't give up.
Yeah.
Keep speaking to that and asking for what you want, recognizing that there needs to be some level of realism on your part in terms of what you're going to get from your partner, but don't just lock it away in a box because it's been frustrating to try to get through to your partner. because the relationship will die anyways then.
Mhm.
And it might take 10, 15, 20 years to die. Better to keep the heat high and figure it out early than to hang out in the dead zone for 20 years, in my opinion. So that's it's one of the reasons why I chose a partner who knows how to bring the fire. It's annoying sometimes. She doesn't let me coast, and in a way, she takes up more space in my head and in my life. But I like it that way. There's a heat in this relationship. There's a spice to it that is never boring. And that's what I want. So yeah, I appreciate that
like
about
a challenge.
you. I like a good challenge.
Yeah. And so sometimes I think, what we're saying is like, it's okay to have boundaries. You have to know yourself well enough to know when your inner child is having hungry demands that aren't realistic versus, hey, this thing is really important to me. For example, for me, there's certain ways of communicating where I'm like, absolutely not. Like that just does not work for me. And I will not tolerate this type of dynamic. Like this is something I am committed to transforming. Harmony is very important to me. And so that was something we worked on for a lot of time. And I brought it up a lot. I was like, this is the thing. This is the thing. Communication, how we bring tone, energy, and all of that. I value harmony in my home. When I have children, I want it to be peaceful. I want them to see loving communication modeled all of the time. I don't want to have snapping or criticizing or judging or any of that. Right. And so there are certain things that are, those are just boundaries. Those are things that we need in order to feel like we're in alignment with our values. And those are the things that we can take a stand for versus, when somebody was bringing up the need for certainty or like, a guarantee of a certain outcome. In some ways, some of those things come from, our inner child feeling a little bit, unsafe or afraid. And so then, we can't be making demands from that place. So we're also constantly tuning into what energy is this coming from? Is this coming from a mature adult self, or is this coming from like a scared, wounded part? And that's okay too, if it is, but the way that we bring it to our partner is going to be different. Like I know when I'm bringing something that is just, it's about my core values and it's what I like absolutely expect in my relationships versus, a part of me is feeling like I need reassurance, and so we have to know ourselves well in order to be able to bring these things to our partners as well. Right. Okay. How to overcome fear to communicate. I feel I have lots to say and bring to the table, but always limit myself due to fear of projection. So this is a great time to engage in the clearing practice with timers. And one of the things that I always invite you to do if you're feeling resistance or you're feeling afraid or you're fearing rejection is to speak to that. So it would literally be, I'm doing my feelings check-in. I'm feeling afraid. I'm feeling some tension in my throat. I'm feeling myself shutting down. I feel like I have a lot to say, but I'm scared you're going to reject me. So I'm noticing myself wanting to hold back, and I'm going to do my best to be total here. I'm going to do my best to be honest. Just speak to it. I notice myself shutting down. Sometimes, in conflict, I'll be like, I notice myself wanting to push you away right now. I notice myself wanting to shut down, but I'm actually going to stay in the game. And sometimes when we just speak to it, we bring the energy down a little bit. I know a lot of public speakers have said when they're feeling nervous right before they go on stage, they just try to amplify that feeling as much as they can before they go out. And then eventually it's like the bubble pops. Right. And so sometimes when we just say, actually, like I'm feeling really defensive right now. Like I feel like I just want to walk away, but I'm not going to. I'm so scared to say what I'm feeling right now because I'm afraid you're going to reject me. Even that, if you're with a willing partner, they're going to hear you and they're going to be like, wow, I'm going to really show that I'm here right now because my partner is doing a very vulnerable thing. So I'm going to open my body here. I'm going to relax. I'm going to make eye contact. I'm going to show them that it's safe. So
Mhm.
we're also creating these invitations for connection when we're just honest. And that's just that muscle that you have to build, right?
Yep. You could also go to workshops and groups that encourage stretching these muscles.
Mhm.
Celina and I went to a workshop called Conscious Relationship Trainings in Vancouver. And they would do group exercises that were kind of confronting, like you'd have to go stand up at the front and admit some dark part of yourself, or how you're vain, or expose some part of your ego. Or maybe you had to walk up to somebody who you were afraid of in the room and look them in the eyes and say, I'm afraid of you because, or maybe walk up to someone in the room who you think you're better than and walk up to them and say, I think I'm better than you because. And it was this process of exposing these parts of your mind that you like to hide, and realizing that you're not going to get beat up, rejected, kicked out. In the end, we all felt closer to each other, and we actually appreciated the honesty, right? There was this reverse opposite thing that happened when we just spoke the truth to each other. There's another workshop called Authentic Relating that does this. They just get people in a circle, and they have these series of games and sentence stems that they play with each other to practice just speaking the scary thing to the other person. And what ends up happening is more authenticity in the room equals more intimacy and more connection, and sort of this like feeling like we really know each other, even though we've only been in here for a couple hours with each other. So that's a good place to go stretch your muscles and practice sort of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. We all have our comfort zones that we like to stay in, and we don't really get anywhere unless we push ourselves out of there with self-regulation and making sure that we're not pushing ourselves too far. Basically, I used to work at a wilderness camp, and we had this idea of like, there's fun, there's adventure, and then there's misadventure, and in adventure, you're still having fun, but you're really stretching yourself. And it's kind of like a new limit for you. And you're like, whoa, this is exciting and scary at the same time. But then there's misadventure where you're like, oh my God, I'm in a trauma response. And so like, you want to go somewhere where you can be an adventure, whether it be in a workshop or in a conversation with your partner.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. We will not forget Ben reading the poem that's coming in a few minutes. Okay, let's just see. Can you touch on how to navigate knowing the relationship needs to end, but fear of abandonment keeps one stuck in an unhealthy dynamic?
Mm-hmm.
Again, I know I might sound like a broken record here, but it really does come back to relationship to self. The more we deepen in that relationship to self, the more that we will be able to stay true to ourselves and to our boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And when we are in self-abandonment, we're going to stay in relationships that don't serve us, that aren't safe, because having someone or anyone is better than being alone.
Mm-hmm.
But when we can be in relationship with ourselves, when we can find a connection to spirit or to source or to God, whatever your relationship is to, spirit energy, when you can find comfort in the elements, when you can, find a way to, connect with, nature, the trees, the lakes, the oceans, things like that. You can build friendships, community. Like I said, go to community groups, go to a support group of some kind where there's a companionship and there's community. Put yourself into these situations where you feel more held, where you know that you can hold yourself. Because one of the reasons that we stay in these relationships and we're afraid to be alone is because we don't have any other support systems set up, and we don't have that support system within ourselves. And so as much as you can, create that for yourself, really spending time with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, maybe you need to go away. Maybe you need to go on a retreat where you're really taking care of yourself. You go on a 2-week yoga retreat where you're really taking care of yourself. You're connecting to your own intuition, your own gut. And getting right with that and spending some time in community with other people where you feel there's like a harmonious thing going on, so that you can come back to your relationship and assess it from with new eyes, right? As long as you're not going away on retreat to flirt with other people and get distracted by some new honeymoon phase, some new relationship that you want to get excited about. If you're really like going away to get in touch with your truth, that's the ticket. You know, men's groups, women's groups. There have been many guys in my groups who eventually, like after them talking to us for long enough, we really get the idea. The group says like, hey man, you're telling us in 99 ways that this relationship needs to end. And the only reason you're in it is because you're lonely. Like it's time to make a move, and we're here for you. We've got you, you know? And I've seen guys make that jump and be like, oh, thank you guys. Like I needed someone to just to reflect that back to me, that like everything I was saying was that I wanted to be out, because I couldn't even see that at the time, you know? Mm-hmm.
Okay. One more. Two more, actually. How do you find a partner that is willing to be in a conscious relationship? Be in a conscious relationship with yourself. Show up in a way that feels true and aligned. And then put yourself in environments where you can meet people, right? Like do things that you love. Just be in alignment with who you are and what you love. Like go join a community nature program, or go do an art class, or go volunteer somewhere, or maybe you're going to school, or whatever it is. Just be authentic and put yourself in situations that are a reflection of what it is that you want for your life and the things that you love. And I really don't believe that there's like a way. There's no formula. That's not how I believe life works. Like our partners just come into our lives when they're meant to. And I don't think that we can do anything to prevent it. And I don't think we can do anything to speed it up. We all have our own paths. And so if we can surrender the timeline and really live life now, and cultivate really rich relationships with people other than romantic partners. When we're single, friendship, such a beautiful place to practice, right? So doing that. Would you ever create a space to be your partner's therapist and take them in a session, or leave that to someone else? No, you can be your partner's friend. I mean, like we hold space for each other, but we're not doing sessions with each other. That's not a healthy dynamic to bring into the romantic partnership. It just creates a bit of an energetic imbalance, creates like an interesting kind of it's just a power imbalance. And that's not really what our partners need. Like we're each other's friends. A lot of times I think that's what couples forget, is you're your partner's friend. If you aren't friends, what are you doing? Like you should be laughing and having fun and prioritizing play. We sometimes forget, like, why are we doing all of this? Why are we even doing the work in relationship? Well, it's not so that we can sit and process with our partner all day. It's actually so we can just clear out the cobwebs, so that the past isn't constantly trailing behind us and things aren't blocking us from being open. And so we can just enjoy. So we can just have a peaceful home life, so that we can laugh together, so we can create things, so that we can explore things that are important to us, so we can explore new parts of ourselves and just enjoy life. That's it. Not so that we can be constantly dredging up stuff, looking for more things to heal, looking for more things to fix, sitting down and talking about our stuff all day long. There is a period in the relationship where that happens a lot. We went through a processing phase where we were processing a lot, but that's not how it's meant to be forever. That's not the point. The point is we're clearing out the cobwebs. We're clearing a path.
Yeah. And if your partner is only willing to have you be their therapist, there's a problem. We've all got to be willing to go outside the relationship to get help. Otherwise we're in the codependent bubble, the special relationship, the cult of two, which is so common these days. It's 157. So
Yeah. Okay. Why don't you pull out the poem and
All right.
I'll download this chat so that I've got it all.
So most of you probably know about the book The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. There is a like a cartoony animated version of it, which I recommend. I don't know where you can find it online, but
I'll see if I can-
we found it and watched it, and it's like one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen. When the poems are being told in this film, there's like these unfolding paintings that are just mesmerizing, along with the words being full of depth. So there's one poem in this book on marriage. So I'm going to read that to you now. It's not very long.
The film is called The Prophet, and I just looked. It looks like you can rent it on YouTube, but you could probably find it on other platforms as well.
Prophet.
It's by the same creator of, if you've ever heard of The Song of the Sea. He also made that film.
The illustrations just psychedelic.
It's a movie recommendation.
You were born together, and together you shall be forevermore. You shall be together when the white wings of death scatter your days. Aye, you shall be together even in the silent memory of God. But let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone. Even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping, for only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together, for the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadow.
It's beautiful.
That's it. I really love the idea of the pillars at the end being, the pillars hold up this structure for family and community to gather inside, underneath. And without the pillars, it's not possible.
Yeah.
If you put the pillars too close together, the building's just going to tip over. Like there has to be this proper distance between, and that makes a good pair.
Love it. Thanks. Well, do you know the name of that poem?
On Marriage.
It's called On Marriage.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can just Google The Prophet Marriage and you'll find it. It's like the first thing that'll come up.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you all being here.
Thank you.
Great. I hope you all got value from this. We're going to send out the slides. If there was anything that I said that I would provide, just jog my memory. I'll try to send you all of the resources as well. And I hope you all have a really beautiful Saturday. And I'm just going to hand it over to Irma here to finish off.
Thank you. Thank you, Celina. Thank you, Ben, for this great course. I just want to make a quick mention about your book that
where is my book?
You have it. Yeah. Celina's book, Becoming the One. Yeah, thank you. It will be available on June 14th. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Happy
everyone.
Saturday.